Good afternoon. So we're back in the whare nui of Ngāti Raukawa, and we have had a site visit of most of the rezoning sites this morning, and this afternoon we start with Ms. Ridley. So if Ms. Ridley could come forward and just take a position there. My name is John Marson, Commissioner Black and Commissioner Kirikiri. So we're here to hear your submission. Absolutely.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko kotirana, ko airana hoki ngā whakapaparanga mai. Engari, ko Aotearoa, ko Somalia, hoki ngā whenua tupu. Ko Ōtaki, te kāinga. Kei Ōtaki au e noho ana. Ko Helen Ridley, tōku ingoa. Tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak to my brief submission, and thanks especially to Ngāti Raukawa iwi for opening your arms, as always, to host us at this beautiful marae. Please excuse me for switching to English. Just a small bit about my background here, which has bearings on my thoughts about the proposed plan change, PC2. I first came with my family to Ōtaki in 1987 as an older but newly trained teacher to work at Ōtaki College. I moved my family here from the South Island for the express purpose of enabling my 3 school-age children to go through a bilingual stream at Ōtaki College, run then by Nan Gray and later Mariana Selby. I taught there for 7 years, and the bilingual department and the Raukawa Marae were significant cornerstones in our lives then and beyond. We were looked after by this marae, and I believe under the protection of the mountains, river and sea. During that time also, we lived at different times in 2 of the then schoolhouses, one in Mill Road, one in Waiarenga Road, and then settled in Bell Street. This whole area, I understand, was and is the papakainga of the Kākik, Rekihana and Bell whānau. But much of that land lost through pressured sales to the Crown or vested in the then Ikaroa Marae Land Board. I returned to Ōtaki 7 years ago after a long time away, and now am privileged, almost certainly by historical injustices, to be living on Mill Road in what is described as the Marae Precinct, just across the road, on what I have subsequently learnt is part of the Kākik Kāinga land. I'm just a beginner in understanding the history of the Ōtaki town area and its implications. I'm ashamed that much to me in my early time was invisible to me. And I'm still only a beginner in my learning. Since I have returned, I have been overwhelmed by the exciting developments which are evident to me as non-Māori living in the midst of the old town. I can now walk down the street and hear te reo spoken naturally all around me by children and adults. I can still travel from sea to mountains, a clear pathway that shows the significance of the connection of the town to nature and allowing important sight lines to mountain and sea. This pathway also shows the ascendance of significant Māori places of learning and creative expression, including the Rūnanga, Kura, Ngā Purapura, Māori land, the Mara, and others, forming what has been described as a Mātauranga Māori education zone for all of Aotearoa, not just for Ōtaki. On this pathway, I can also witness beautiful tangata-led visible architectural designs based and built and not 4 stories high by tangata whenua. On that same pathway, the community can access the growing tangata-led health services that have held us up throughout COVID lockdowns and beyond. I am welcomed to participate in this world. All of these things and more are why I live here, and I believe are why others would come here. These developmental changes appropriately are Māori-led. This is a Māori town. This is the special character of Ōtaki, if we're using that terminology. And my view is that all planning, or my view, quite apart from te tiriti obligations, is that all planning needs to support and reflect this character, which is built on tangata whenua values and tikanga. So how do I connect this to the proposed PC2 plan changes? Well, it's not up to me to decide, but here are some of my thoughts. Firstly, that the identification of Ōtaki as a future urban zone, as proposed, is surely a misnomer and evidence of the one-size-fits-all approach to the application of MDRs that appear to dominate the overall council change suggestions. Who decided on that vision? On what basis? It does not align with the special character of Ōtaki or differentiate the area in any way to make Ōtaki attractive to more residents, businesses, and community services as directed by the government, let alone to what I understand of tangata whenua values. It does not make sense. Please rescind. Secondly, I would ask you to ensure that tangata whenua values and tikanga are reflected consistently and strongly throughout the district plan, not just relegated to lists of discrete scheduled items in a list or relegated to sections on papakainga. I understand that the work on papakainga was a positive outcome of some meaningful partnership with tangata whenua here, and I support that area of the draft plan. But was the same kind of partnership carried out throughout all aspects of the plan changes? Surely this is a given these days, as well as a Treaty of Waitangi requirement. Thirdly, I suggest revising language changes accordingly as suggested by other submissions. Some strong words like ensure, protect, have been eliminated in this draft and replaced by languages that weakens perceptions of council commitment. Weak words like acknowledge, consider, will recognize. What does that mean anyway? I support all of the Rūnanga and ngā Hapū o Raukawa submission suggestions around language changes. Fourthly, I would ask for review of the zoning areas in line with iwi knowledge and advice and the recent Tiriti o Waitangi claim research information on ancestral land. Please pause intensification changes until the treaty process has gone through. This will give time also for council and iwi to jointly plan with regard to impacts of current climate change, land use, and infrastructure issues that have been brought to the forefront by recent climate events. Fifthly, I would ask you to consider the extension of the Marae precinct zone to stretch to include wider town areas, the Papakainga areas, through the old town shopping and community support areas, through Main Street and surroundings, into County Road. Surely Papakainga development can exist within an extended Marae precinct. What value is there apart from for commercial developers in having 4-story buildings in the old town area? Let alone how will the infrastructure cope when it's already struggling? What will 4 stories do to sightlines, to the sunlight and essential green areas and mara of the town? What evidence is there that the town precinct and community will benefit socially or commercially from upward development? Sixth, I would ask that the next draft review the design guides in accordance with the request and partnership offer as discussed in the submission of Te Wānanga o Raukawa. In Ōtaki, there is visible evidence that tangata whenua have access to creative and development expertise and energy that can ensure that visible and physical aspects of change in the town reflects across the board tangata whenua values and tikanga. Not only should co-design with tangata whenua be a given, but it will also ensure building planning that strengthens the visible special nature of this town. In listing the above, I want to acknowledge the hard work that has already gone on these plan changes by council and submitters and tangata whenua. All are under pressure to follow government directions within a short time frame and somehow meet pressing social, housing and development needs. There will be much work going on that I don't know about. However, with the current drastic wake-up call of around climate change and its tragic impact on people and the earth, the council has additional reason to put a pause on intensification and zoning boundaries until there have been further national and Wellington regional plan reviews and decisions around infrastructure, housing, and land use. Finally, I support the submissions of ngā Hapū o Raukawa and Te Wānanga o Raukawa. Above all, I hope the council can ensure the meaningful partnership essential in working with tangata whenua and getting these planning changes right. Thank you for listening. Ngā mihi kia koutou.
Are you happy for us to have a copy of your submission? Because there's a lot of things in there as you were going through. I was wanting to make notes on. I mean, you listed 5 different things. You know, in 5 minutes' time, I'll have forgotten them all. But if you,
Me too, which is why I listed them.
good, thank you. But also, you mentioned a name early on that tugs at my heartstrings, and that's Nan Gray. I mean, if she were alive today, she'd be saying the same things here in this marae. Absolutely. All of it. I see Nan saying that. Absolutely. To say nothing of Miriam and the rest of them. I mean, they're still around. I can argue with them still these days. I can't with Nan because she's not here anymore. But we did have lots of arguments and debates. That's probably a better way to put it. Yeah, she had a strong mind and the sort of strength of mind and purpose and character that's required now under these trying circumstances, as you've quite rightly pointed out there. So I don't have any problem with anything you say. In fact, I'm very supportive of a lot of things that you say. But I just want to pick up on one other thing that I assume that you were alluding to, but you didn't actually say it, which was you mentioned the fact that Ōtaki is zoned as a future urban, but you didn't really talk about the more immediate issue that's being raised in this plan change, which is modernizing the beach area and the town. Yes, that's part of one of the things we're looking at in this whole plan change. What are your thoughts on that?
To be honest, I didn't feel I had any authority to say anything much about those 2 areas. My understanding is that the coastal issue is imminent, as you say, and I would see that as certainly included under the principles that I've laid out for the town area, but also has some very immediate things that have to be addressed. I agree. I have to be honest and say I gave up on thinking about the area along the state highway and the main road where all the outlet shops are. I feel quite in despair about that. I feel that there is, I understand that businesses need to succeed and that there needs to be wealth brought into the area, but in my view, that's not brought in by increasing road development of urban outlet businesses or commercial businesses that have been set up to capture perhaps the trade that doesn't live in Ōtaki. And also I see that as quite a complicated area for redesign to make it feel like a community, a welcoming community place in that part of town. So I really didn't feel as if I have any expertise to make any further comment.
The other part of your presentation that I think requires a lot more discussion and thought is the the issue you raised around the marae takiwa, extending it, I mean, which, and to include greater flexibility for papakainga development and stuff like that. Do you want to just add anything more to that, what you were saying?
Only that I understand that it's complex because papakainga need that development, I understand, and support, and need to be able to make quick decisions about providing support for people that need it. So this might well, and I'm sure we'll be at odds sometimes with an extended marae precinct. So that's a knot that I can't undo at the moment. And actually, my only question that I would have had for the commissioners is, can those two exist together?
I just have two other things I wanted to raise with you, and picking up from what you said. One of them is about the special nature of Ōtaki, and emphasizing, of course, its strong tangata whenua base, that's built Ōtaki to a large extent, and you quite rightly point out the wānanga is here now. We have kura kaupapa and all that sort of stuff. And but more to the point, my discussion is how that kind of descriptor, I guess, is able to be applied across the nation rather than just pepper-potted around, maybe even just in Ōtaki. But I think the same issue applies elsewhere. It's not just an Ōtaki thing. Do you have any other thoughts you want to share with us on that?
Well, I guess that has got to come from within, and from within the community, and not necessarily aligns with quick growth. I mean, I've just identified the special character as I see it and feel it. I'm not sure that that's visible for my friends from other parts who arrive, unless I can persuade them to stay longer, or unless they know more about my life here. I work part-time from home still, and so I've still got connections outside the area. But, and I think that there's a real danger of, there's that real danger of appropriating and selling an idea like a Māori town. And if that is to be pursued, then that must come, in my view, from tangata whenua, and already is, in terms of, for example, Māori land, which has extended internationally hugely already. Wānanga, I'm aware, is the Raukawa Marae is esteemed and respected widely internationally, as in Ōtaki. So I guess I would like to support that growth from that direction, but I wouldn't like to see it commercialized as an appropriation.
Okay,
Yeah.
The other take I had is closely related. In fact, it's very close. And that's the point you raised about you instance Papakainga being one of the few areas in the plan change where tikanga is evident, more evident than anywhere else. And your argument being that surely by the year 2000 and where we are now, 23, you might have expected a bit more normality to be reflected in the partnership approach to things, rather than saying that bit's Māori and you leave it there and the rest, and it doesn't fit here. Because I think that's one of the key issues, not just in this particular exercise, but across the country, that we're still striving to get towards. And all I'm saying is I guess I'm relieved to hear somebody say it in the hearings, because it doesn't actually come through that clearly, but it is one of the underlying tensions, I guess, in exercises like this. And whilst we've matured quite a bit over the years, you can argue that we've gone quite some distance towards having some sort of meaningful partnership as the treaty might have expected us to do. But we still haven't got there. We've still got a way to go. Do you agree?
I agree completely with that, and it's a great source of distress for me. It's ongoing, obviously. You know, I walk around the industrial area here and I think, well, why do these buildings have to look like this? Where is, I mean, I see that there are plantings, that there are people that are doing and caring for little bits of it. But yeah, that breaking things into, oh, this is the Māori bit, so we've met the requirements. I've got a particular opinion too, which I will add to that, which is around the meaning of consultation and meaningful consultation. I've been aware for years of that the normal view of consultation through government departments and institutions in Aotearoa has been working on something, making a plan, working on something, getting it all detailed, and then sending it out for consultation. And that's called consultation. It's still going on. And for me, real consultation means right from the very beginning of when the ideas first come up, right from the beginning and all the way through and in all areas. And I know that takes a lot of resources, but that's where, to me, resources should go. And, you know, if we can ever get that bit right, you know, we might not be sitting so often with rounds and rounds of submissions. I don't know that, but that's my view. And I think, you know, I'm disappointed that we're still just looking at these papers. And as I said, my knowledge and understanding is very limited. I only see my little bit of the picture, but yeah, that's a big disappointment to me. Yeah.
Look, thank you very much. I don't have any further questions, but ngā mihi kia koe.
Thank you very much. It was very clear. Thank you. Quentin, would you like to come forward? Good to see you again.
Good afternoon, dear Commissioners. We'll try again. First of all, my apologies for not making the welcome yesterday morning. Sorry, my waka was stranded down the South Island and I couldn't make it. I was really disappointed on that. But my submission relates really to the need for an enlarged coastal qualifying matter precinct. And everything comes off that. Removal of Jacobs V1, V2, removal of all use and analysis of RCP 8.5, RCP 8.5H plus, based on the Ministry for the Environment, Coastal Hazards and Climate Change Guidance for Local Government 2017, and the need for beach residential qualifying matter precincts. So our background is, we've been here for over 100 years. Our family, we qualify under Raukawa Marae and use of our resources here in Kapiti, especially Waikanae, and have been involved in this, in coastal hazards, because we have lived on the beach, with the beach, and in the beach for all that time. I was involved in very involved in developing the first coastal report which was adopted by council in 2006. In 2008, I was slipped by a staff member of KCDC a draft report on Roger Shand, and I sat down and worked on that. I didn't realize how bad it was when I produced my 32 pages. I think Joan Allen might have got it with 148 pages, how bad the Shand report was. But it was interesting. GNS were very useful in talking about uplift and decrease in the area, and they were said at that stage in 2008, 2009, all their records for this district showed that uplift was overcoming the downward cycle. And also when you compared uplift against sea level rise, it was more dramatic. Again, I built a house at Waikanai in 2010. The sea was directly below us at that stage. Now it's 150 meters away. Sorry, the toe of the sand dunes. The toe was within 10 meters of our house at that stage. It's now 150 meters away and growing. Pardon? 1 Hapū Street. Yep. Been involved as a founding member of Crew and have been involved in all discussions. I am not a scientist. I'm not a lawyer. But I believe I can read acts and follow and understand how things are meant to work from a layperson's perspective. And that was confirmed really when we took our appeal to the Environment Court against KCDC to reinstate the coastal environment, which KCDC staff wanted to replace with what we called the Boffa lines, which was done by Frank Boffa, which coincidentally actually follow very closely to the Coastal Qualifying Matters Precinct lines. And it was thrown out at that stage by the Environment Court. Totally. So I don't know how much of the technical stuff you want me to read through or go through. Thought you might have. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Good. The other, the main thing the other part that, the two things in section 24 that really strike me as best available and likely effects, which is the last sentence. That's the one. Yep. And I always remember Dr. Bryce Wilkinson showing us the actual analysis of likely mathematically, and which was a range from 40% to 65%. So it's basically the top part of a bell curve. And I thought that's simple, and so subsequently you can find it in all types of literature and has been recognized. And the other part is best available. Well, it's best available on the day. Now, everyone, I think, comes with the perspective of trying to do the best on the day, but things supersede and you've got to change. I feel that, Jacobs have not changed despite them being alerted to the facts. And the things they had, when crew presented our addendum to their reports, we were pretty sure on the legal side of it and the scientific side of it, and we tried to help them, but they would not change. It is very much like the Shand report when you actually boil it down. So a bit of a going back 10 years, which worries me. So my argument is that NZCPS is not being recognised by the current district plan other than the coastal environment map, which has been through the court system. That is the only thing that you can hang a hat on.
Was that actually established by the court or just the plan process?
The coastal environment map was originally in the PDP. Council staff, when they got Frank Boffer's submission, removed it and put what we call the Boffer lines in. I can't remember what the technical term was.
And is this coastal areas of coastal influence?
That's right. Our argument was, and the Environment Court agreed with us totally, and reinstated the coastal environment map, was that a true report had been done, which actually analysed everything and gave the situation.
And was that more landward or less landward than Boffer?
Quite a bit. Apparently under the section 32, 42, I can't remember which one, they decry my reasoning because it's 83% of the total area. Well, I can't find any percentage terms in the RMA or the Intensification Act, which states you can or cannot use a percentage.
Right. So it was an increase in the envelope.
It is an increase, but the rationale I've used is that it's a good placeholder until the work is done. I don't expect, what I understand on science is that that'll be the final thing, but it's the only thing we can hang our hat on, in the fact that we've got a vulnerability report which doesn't satisfy NZCPS. The only thing that satisfies the NZCPS at this stage is the coastal environment map.
But just explain to me the logic of your position as I understand it, which is the Jacobs report is a overestimation of the effects relative to the policy statement. So because that's an overestimation, we should now overestimate by orders of magnitude by using the coastal environment envelope as the placeholder. I don't, it doesn't strike me as.
I know that sounds strange, but the overestimation using RCP 8.5 and blah, 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 I quite agree. You should not be used because it's not in that top of that bell curve. But the vulnerability report does not satisfy NZCPS on so many other matters. It uses incorrect science, like using the Bruin rule for a start, which is developed for shingle and rocky beaches, not sediment-driven beaches. And that's what they're basing a lot of their stuff on. There is far better technical ways of doing it than using the Bruin rule.
Yes, but they don't include using a coastal environment envelope.
No, well, that's why I go back to here. I'm going to be struggling on which clauses to use, John. And you're going to catch me. No troubles about that. You'll love it. just got to find where it's.
Well, but aren't you driven to, like, I understand the concerns around the science, and the council says it is just a placeholder. So aren't we in the position, so you seem to accept that there needs to be a placeholder.
Yes.
Wouldn't we use the least of the overestimation tools rather than the most?
No, you can't use estimation tools when the science driving those estimation tools are not correct.
Yes, but
And-
your
and-
proposition is not an even science. It's actually a
No,
completely
no,
different
no,
analysis.
I quite agree, because I'm relying on the precautionary effect, which is in, is it 6 of NZCPS? And I'm just guessing now, John, on the numbers. It's somewhere, saying there has not been the work done by the council of anything that satisfies NZCPS, we've got to go back a step and look what NZCPS says if it hasn't been done. And I quite agree. The coastal environment area as defined in that map is too great, but it is a placeholder, and it's the only correct placeholder to use until the work is done. And then from that point, we've got definitives. At the moment, we've got nothing. And I think that is the problem we've got here.
Will be correct to say at the end of the process, we'll have another the best estimation, not certainty, because it's
No, there's no certainty
no.
at all. And anyone who tries to say that is, yeah, should be shot immediately. I can. I know we do it ours. But the other part is stormwater control, overland flows are not addressed in Jacobs. There's a whole raft of other issues that are not addressed that makes it's a partial step to a risk assessment, but it's only one part of is what they've done. And within that, I might disagree with their science, but there's a lot of other areas that have not been touched upon. And as they say, it is not a risk assessment and does not fulfill the criteria of NZCPS. Okay, I'll go on to the last page. How's that? Will that help you a lot? Yes. No, it gets rather boring and technical. Well, I found it's interesting actually trying to work an argument and trying to actually analyze it from a layperson's perspective, how to make this intensification process work. And I think that's the big thing. You've got to be positive with it and try and make it work. The problem is the council is stymied because of the lack of a coastal hazard policy, and therefore we've got to take a step back and see what the RMA intensification says and the coastal policy statements say when you haven't got section policy 24 completed.
Just on that, we've all got some war wounds over the hazard lines. And I promoted a more nuanced approach, which was acknowledging the importance of a name, but saying what you need to identify is areas where it's inappropriate to allow increased levels of development and patterns of development. because otherwise you're always choosing a battle about where that line should be, and really this is not science. But also you're making a whole lot of other statements about the property that are potentially problematic for landowners. So at least the precinct here has the benefit of not drawing a line, but saying, actually, this is a precinct where on the current, and you can argue future about the science, but here's a precinct which at the moment we need to establish to stop that further development, which was far beyond what could have been done under the district plan. In other words, some of the beach precincts by default operated in the same way. And that to me suggests the court council's on the right trajectory, which is not to draw battle lines through hazard lines, but to draw precincts where it says, look, this is the present reality. We don't want to exacerbate the problem or compromise our options in the future. So let's not encourage increased levels of development here. And that's sort of the trajectory I think they're following, which to me is positive in the sense that it's no one's going to win a battle which says we shouldn't have at least some acknowledgement of where areas should not be developed in the face of climate change, further intensification and so forth. So my question is, in light of that, like my observations about this is why that method is being treated by some landowners as a hazard line, as opposed to a precinct to limit the operation of the NDRS, and why we would want to, you would want to, or anyone would want to force the council back into this lines argument where the only thing that looks like success for you is not individual owners not having their property within a line, as opposed to a more nuanced approach, which is to say, yes, these strips, whatever the truth about them are, and the arguments, the science, which we can all talk to the cows come home, these are areas we all agree should not warrant further development, as a signal that because in a sense they only ever become, planning is only ever a placeholder. I mean, this process shows that. I mean, every plan, people think it's holy writ, but we all now know it's just a placeholder until we have a better idea. And so I just wanted to have a frank exchange about that, because you and I have been on slightly different ends of the same continuum, and I don't feel as passionately about that as you do. And I just wanted to be upfront and have a conversation about that, because we've shared ideas from time to time.
Well, okay, John, I agree totally with your philosophical argument, in the fact that I would prefer no lines at all. I don't think, I think it's actually an individual's risk or a family's risk to decide what they do with their property, within that property. And that is what I understood the RMA was based on. You could do most things as long as you weren't hurting your neighbors, and it was your risk and your perceived risk towards the future. I would think that councils should actually get out of trying to define risk, because they're as good as you and I are, or anyone in this room is, in defining risk. Everyone's got a different perception of risk. We've seen it in the bureaucracy at the moment with a no-risk philosophy, which is ludicrous. It's too expensive, we can't afford it, and also stops development, stops people moving forward in a lot of cases. So we've got that. The other problem I have with the qualifying precedent is it's not addressing flooding. Now, we have other properties within Waikato, which are in what's termed the garden area. They are at more danger than I am sitting on the beach with flooding. Like, it was only a month ago that the water drained off one of the lawns. Now that is high water tables coming from the hills, held by the sea. Now, I've also seen it on the sea, every low tide. Most years, we can see these springs coming through at low tide where the aquifer comes up and starts going out in the sea from the hills. 5 years ago, it was approximately 5 years ago, it was quite a severe drought here. Those springs stopped down on the beach. I actually rang up the regional council to find out what they're monitoring, their boards that monitor the saline thing, or they hadn't switched them on for 2 years. I was intrigued on that, following that argument through, whether or not the sea was pushing inland at that stage, because the springs weren't flowing, which tend to suggest that water was going inland, sea was going inland. And, you know, okay, I'll be an island where we're situated, we're about 4 meters above sea level, I suppose. But I'll be an island while the rest of the inland country will be underwater, is the way I read it in the future. Well, I must be attached to Capti by the time it happens. Yeah. Who knows what's going to happen? That's correct. It's beautiful. You've got 360 degrees views, beautiful ones of the hills up behind us, which really anchors us to the place. It's a lovely feeling. And then you've got the openness, and you're watching the wandering of the estuary of the Waimiha, which is hilarious to watch. Being a man-made estuary, it moves severely.
Right. Okay, so that's it.
Yes. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Quentin. Right, so now we have the submission from Ngā Hapū Ōtaki. I just said welcome to Ngā Hapū or Ōtaki as submitters. Welcome to our process, not welcome to their marae. And so we're in your hands, and you just need to take us forward from there.
Kia ora. They're working all right? Oh, tēnā tātou. E tautoko ana hau I nā kupu mihi, nā kupu whakatau ana kai kōrero I nā nahi. Hara mai koutou ko te rōpū motuhake nei, tēnā koutou. Kia koutou nā kai tautoko, nā kai whakarongo, nau mai, hara mai. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Those were some words to support the words of welcome from our speakers yesterday, to welcome the panel here, and also to the council staff and everyone else that's here today. Welcome and greetings. To the panel, we got the chance to listen to some of the proceedings yesterday, and we appreciate the way that you have discussed matters with presenters and the questions you've posed to them about Ōtaki and how our cultural needs and well-being have been considered in proposals. We are hearing that you care and are looking for solutions. You have our written submissions to the council with most of the detail. It's been pretty well covered in there. Today we intend to provide some context by a brief intro about Atiawa, Raukawa and Tō, and some kōrero about Ōtaki. Then to get into some of the detail about our taiao and the estimated future impact of climate change. And the last part will move into discussion on sections about the plan change and our requests to this panel to take a precautionary approach for Ōtaki. Ko Kirsten Hapeta hau, no konei, no Ngāti Raukawa, no Ngāti Tō, no Te Atiawa. I'll be starting off our presentation today and then handing over to Dr. Aroha Spinks, no Ngāti Raukawa, no Ngāti Kapu Manawa Whiti, and then to Denise Hapeta, no Ngāti Raukawa. Before coming back to me to go into some of that detail, jointly today we are representing Ngā Hapū Ōtaki. Closely connected through whakapapa and joint ventures, Ngāti Tō, Te Atiawa and Ngāti Raukawa are the iwi in this region, the mana whenua. Ngāti Tō with some Te Atiawa joining along the way migrated to here to Kapiti Coast in the 1820s and settled in the region. Mai miria te kakara, mai waitapu ki rangataua, mai miria te kakara ki whitireia, whakawhitia te moana o Raukawa, ki wairau, ki whakatau. The area between Rangatira River and Nelson. We're known as te kōtahitanga o Te Atiawa o Ngāti Raukawa me Ngāti Tō Rangatira. Also known as the Confederation of the Iwi and Hapū of those iwi, or art is a term we'll be using today. After the migration here, we had a number of joint ventures. The first major post-European initiative was the building of Rangatira Church here in Ōtaki in the late 1840s, and then later on its replication. Another was the establishment of the Ōtaki Māori Racing Club then the Ōtaki Māori College, and the building of this marae matua, Raukawa, in 1936, and the formation of the Raukawa Marae Trustees. This body of 69 members, representing the iwi and hapū of the Art Confederation, administers this marae. Another important joint development by the Confederation was the creation of the Ōtaki and Porirua Trust Board in 1943. In August 1975, the Raukawa trustees introduced into their agenda hapū and iwi planning and began a 25-year tribal development experiment. This experiment is known as Whakatupuranga Ruamano Generation 2000. The guiding principles of WRM, Whakatupuranga Ruamano, are our people are our wealth. We must develop and retain. He taonga te reo, our language is a taonga. We must halt its decline and revive it. Our marae is our principal home. We must maintain and respect it. Tino rangatiratanga, self-determination, is about discovering opportunities to advance our aspirations and determining our own futures. The Raukawa trustees established Te Wānanga Raukawa as a natural and necessary extension of Whakatupuranga Ruamano, mainly to help achieve the educational aspirations of the iwi. Te Wānanga Raukawa became an incorporated body in 1984, and in 1993 was recognised by the Crown as a wānanga under new legislation known as the Education Amendment Act. Ōtaki, he waka mātauranga. Now, Te Wānanga Raukawa, along with the kōhanga reo and kura that provide mātauranga Māori education here for our tamariki and rangatahi in tikanga Māori spaces, are making a major contribution to our bicultural nation. We have tens of thousands of te reo certificate level graduates and thousands of diploma and degree graduates, including hundreds of graduates who focus primarily on te reo Māori and tikanga Māori. This means that Te Wānanga Raukawa, art and Ōtaki are making a major contribution to improving the position and well-being of our art iwi and of other iwi whose members choose to come and study here. Ōtaki has been a good place for this to occur. It's historically important to art. Geographically, it's in the middle of art, of our art boundary area. We have our marae matua here and a number of other marae here in Ōtaki and then just down the road, both north and south. So this role in the normalising of te reo and tikanga Māori is significant. We regard it as a taonga of national importance, and it's certainly still very important for art. Quite a few people that are in this sort of education sphere and live in Ōtaki, have their children at kura or at kōhanga, and then at the wānanga, will sometimes describe it as a bit of a bubble. And if you grew up in another area, and I'm one of those that grew up in Upper Hutt actually, in a completely different education environment. If you grew up there and just racism wasn't a normal everyday part of your life, and then you move here into this sort of tikanga Māori space where being Māori is normal and tikanga Māori is just the normal practice, it's starkly different. it's a huge relief to be in a place where this is normalized and accepted and celebrated and respected. And it's difficult to imagine if you haven't been in a different environment. Now a lot of us have gotten really used to it, and if this is our normal way of operating here, we go somewhere else, it can be quite a shock to experience, to go into a place where tikanga Māori is not the normal environment. We do experience it from time to time when we venture out of Ōtaki. And yeah, it's a really strong reminder of the value of what we have here. It also, though, is a reminder of the risks and the fragility of it. A lot of people tell us that we've made fantastic progress and that, you know, we're fortunate to be in this environment, that it's strong and a number of people have got us here. And it's true that there were many people who worked tirelessly for us to be in the position that we are in today. I'm sure that they would agree, though, that it's still in its infancy. We've still got a long way to go. We're partway there. We're nowhere near where we might have been had we not have been interrupted. That's clear to us. And for us, it's imperative that this environment, this place is given the best opportunity to help us move from surviving as Māori, as a people, to thriving. And how does this relate to the work that you're doing? The increasing numbers of non-Māori coming into the area and the growth that can occur can disrupt our connection to all of these things. It puts it at risk. And we're concerned with working with our council and others, all the other organisations, to help us do things in a way that takes care of these things, that helps us to protect the things that are important to us. We'll come back to that. So ngā Hapū Ōtaki, in 1998, the 5 Hapū of Ngāti Raukawa that sit within the Ōtaki area came together to exercise rights as kaitiaki over the Ōtaki River. We challenged KCDC over the planned taking of water from the Ōtaki River. The hearings were held here in this whare, and that was deliberate. It was done to give it the status it deserved to protect our taonga te wai, and was an historic occasion. We regard this too as a huge important hearing, as it will have has the potential to have such a huge effect on us. We serve to assist our 5 Hapū to work together to realise their dreams and aspirations, to live in a thriving and vibrant community where we all actively contribute to sustaining our people, our land and our environment for future generations according to tikanga Māori. We seek to work together to live with the land, not on it, to prioritise caring for our area over unnecessary development and financial gain. We have offered practical alternative solutions to the council to help us to do this. These have been rejected so far. As you've seen by our submissions, we've been active in responding to Te Tupu Pai and the proposed district plan changes. We seek ways to work together with our council and others to prioritise caring for our area. KCDC have taken the position that the government has prescribed what must be done and their hands are tied. We understand this. We note a number of things in the responses to our submission points. Find it as a bit of an escape clause. We understand that the legislation is very prescriptive to councils and how they must fulfill their duties. And it will not, in the responses to our submission, it will not preclude us working with KCDC in the future. We do note the goodwill and intention there. We will keep these on record and continue to work with the council. We're not very confident though that they will bear fruit and may happen a bit too late. So we'll address some of those in a bit more detail later in our presentation. We regard working with KCDC and local authorities as an opportunity for us to continue our mātauranga Māori kōrero tuku iho mahi and our interconnectedness, whakapapa relationship with our natural world and taiao. That leads me to hand it over to Aroha Spinks, who will talk about that. Tēnā tātou.
Kia ora koutou. Mihi nui. Our ancestral historic lands were densely forested from the mountains to the sea with an abundance of bird life, flocks of thousands. Our other resources and our cultural way of living in harmony with nature. The alluvial floodplains along the Kapiti coast coursed with ever-changing waterways that were free to run from the mountains towards the sea. In geological context, the landscape formed only a few million years ago, and the land forming uplifted, and there's signs that it subsided for a while. And then in the Pleistocene period, there was an uplift again, which resulted in the sea level retreating. Our soil relief, that's just a pictorial view from the mountains to the ocean there in Aroha. I think it's a stunning sign of what it once was. If we look at briefly, I've got a few bits in the evidence as well to see the soil relief of the Kapiti coast, and you'll be able to have a look in the evidence as well. I've included it there. But you'll see from the mountain ranges, which are really steep, it goes down to smaller foothills, then a coastal plain, coastal sand and peaks with old dunes, which we still have in about 1,000-year dune ridges along the back. From our larger sized Ōtaki River and Waitohu streams to the smaller tributaries, we had meandering freely throughout this area. Streams like the Mangapauri, Rangiuru, all very important sources of kai, abundant in so many resources, from papakainga uses to rongoa, all in interconnected wetlands as well. Numerous natural springs, dune lakes and lagoons, which are quite special for this area. There's only a few around Aotearoa. So sensitive ecosystems. You can see on the Leslie Adkin map the number of waterways intersecting. We've had a number of research through this area to support all our treaty research. But on top of that, there's a number of doctoral thesis, master's thesis research done by our own around our environment. Our waka used to travel along through these wetlands and through, not out on sea, actually through on inland before all the drainage came through. 1880s was the deforestation that took out our dense forest in the area. Our taonga species were all, and the intricacies and interconnectedness of those were all well understood by our tūpuna, and our kaumātua talk about and remember how it once flourished in their lifetime. So we're talking only 100 years of seeing that difference of what we are now facing with today. They had a great awareness of where those taonga species could be caught, where were the areas to have for tohi rites, for cleansing, for baptisms, for other significant cultural practices. Our coastline with those estuaries and ocean were pristine and teeming with life. You can see from some of the maps and things like that, sites of significance. And please remember, they're not a dot on a page. That the areas are much more significant in that, in the places in which we tracked and where we found mahinga kai close by. Many as well are not currently in the district council plans and things like that. They've been protected and looked after by our own. However, you can still see how important these ancestral lands and parts of nature were and still are today. So the mana, mauri and ecological well-being of these ancestral landscapes have diminished over time. As a result of, as I mentioned, forest clearing, hydrological modifications of these catchments, containing them to certain places, the effects of horticulture, agriculture, and urbanisation. Humans are by far one of the largest detrimental factors occurring within our whenua and impacting on our taiao as a whole. Flooding was known to occur in this district and in this township. Just as an example, here in Ōtaki, there are records of the 1906, 1920, 1925, 1926, 1930, and a massive flood in 1931. That one closed the railway station, took ballast out of the railway bridge, caused damage to local residents, market gardeners, farmers, and iwi. It actually travelled the flood right past here, through town. The rivers were known along this entire coastline to move, a kilometre each way in the past. That was their natural flows. So 1931, I think I've got some photos there, showing those major floods. There were 3 just in that 1 year. 2 actually occurred 8 days apart from each other. So massive stop banks were erected at Crystal's Bend, going right out to the river mouth. Further floods, though, still occurred 1936, 1940, 1954, and I don't think I need to go on. Our township is situated on a major river system, and I'll talk a bit more about the other waterways soon. But as you can see around Aotearoa, effects of climate change are once again bringing these major river systems to the forefront of our minds, and I'm sure certainly yours. So presently, all locals could probably attest to seeing this. We're having very wet winters, and even we've just had a wet summer. But water table in this town and along this coast is very close to the surface. It's a low-lying area. It prevents the draining and causes water to pond on our surfaces for long periods of time. Much of the coast has been built on drained wetlands, so it is actually not to be unexpected and will become more common in time. Fresh water supply is currently stretched here. The new reservoir is proposed, but we question the proposal to expand our population at this time. We acknowledge the current KCDC policies that exist that require new dwellings to have water tanks. However, we're also aware of developers already requesting consent exceptions to not include those tanks or to make them actually very small. to back in more housing for economic growth. And we caution this. We also look to better designs such as having part reticulation systems with grey waters, and the importance of future planning designs. We acknowledge the stormwater attenuation policy that states that level of water coming onto a new property or dwelling should not exceed the natural runoff. That is great in principle. However, we're aware that with the current rules, it means that the importance is on the design. If the design's not actually right, there's no checks afterwards to actually ensure that those new dwellings and that new development actually abides by that stipulation. And we'd love to see that in the future, and we hope to work with the council on that in the Whaitua Kapiti and areas like that opportunities. So we'd like to see that monitoring happening, and then also the enforcement to ensure that those designs, are ensured that they're working, and then future ones are designed accordingly. If it's like, well, if it doesn't, let's look at changing those designs, which we're all keen to be a part of. Currently in Ōtaki, our stormwater is getting disposed to the ground. As I mentioned, that's a major issue given that the shallow groundwater table. Seawater, which is much denser, influences, and it influences as far as here in our main township. We're very aware of the urupa next to our Rangatira church that has the graves go up and down according to the time. So we know the pressures of groundwater is influenced by seawater as far as here. So it's very important with future sea level rise. In the large rain events, there's simply nowhere for that stormwater to go. With regular winter storms, we have many locals know there's certain roads that will block. You'll have cones in areas, and the blocking, and simply places underwater. We've got new housing up on stilts right out towards the Ōtaki River. I've seen puddles just about the size of this room under those new dwellings, and they'll sit there for a number of days. And all things that are being considered moving forward, and we just emphasise that importance. We know of roads, and we know the local areas, and have those with so much knowledge around our local township and that mātauranga that sits within those who have lived there all their lives, and mokopuna of those that have always been here. We have roads in our township where we know you're dry on one side and you're wet on the other. We've known of poles going in, and they can be actually 6 metres, and they've been knocked with a pole driver and they disappear into Papatunuku. They go because of the softness within our grounds. And this is actually just happening within the last 12 months. If we consider the infrastructure of underwater piping, it currently allows for 20 millimetres per hour rainfall intensity. Now we're simply getting more storms that are greater than that. And if we look at those in Auckland, we look at those on the East Coast, we look at those in Nelson, they're higher than that. So the capacity here isn't able to cope. So where does it go? Onto the streets, into those pondings. So we're looking at including that as part of the future designing, that we have those natural areas or reinstate wetlands and restore areas. Our sewage system will not cope with additional load. We know it's at maximum now. It hasn't failed yet, but we know of pumps in Ōtaki Street, the south end of Ōtaki Beach, which actually feeds into the Ōtaki pump. And we know that there are projects on coming, but right now we're asking for that pause on increasing the population when we're at maximum. We're aware of rainfall that increases and the ingress of the water that goes into those storage pipes and network. So it increases the amount of water and effluent going through those systems. So we're also aware of a report that came out last week showing plume with contamination around one of our land discharge treatment areas. So we just ask that, that we pause for a moment, that we look at this, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But that is showing that currently our sewage system is at maximum. And that's undeniable evidence of contamination coming out and going a little bit further than the network is currently holding. Historic, where am I up to? Oh yes, so you can see here with the photo of the historic wetlands. So I've given you, hopefully it's a colour copy to show you those historic wetlands that go throughout this area that we know with future predictions will return to our whenua and just remain for longer periods of time. Just want to show you the maroon areas. Those are still the little pockets of land, although they're still very significant as well, that remain in ancestral Māori ownership with Ture Whenua. Susan Woodley produced a draft recently on the purchasing of Ōtaki Māori land and the development of our Ōtaki township. So we have a copy of that draft, which can be provided to you. But we're just pointing out that the whenua and ancestral areas are very precious to us. So mentioning the climate change, we want to acknowledge the work by KCDC as well as Takutai Kapiti and the community-led adaptation project. There were a number of community submissions along with our own that asked for us to please pause on future developments in these areas. Those regions, and I think you can see the northern adaptation there with the red lines surrounding the area. In Ōtaki, you can see the bubble coming through, and there's more maps in your handout. Those were based on scientific advice, those areas. And that's why we asked for a restriction on the building levels due to the area being prone to sea level rise, coastal inundation, as well as groundwater flooding. Climate change is already impacting our coast. Our country is now in climate crisis, and this is only the beginning. We acknowledge those severe weather events that have been happening around the country. The devastation doesn't just occur to humans, it's the whole ecosystems. It's the biodiversity that exists within. The infrastructure as well, the buildings, and on people, our physical, spiritual, psychological, social, ecological, economic impacts that will come for years. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. It's not too far to imagine on the other side of those ranges what the poor communities are going through, and a mihi to all those who lost their lives, the impacts on those communities, the hapū iwi. Just a mihi to all of them. I think we've got a few photos to show. Oh, sorry, if we just go back one, I'll just explain that one really quickly. Professor Martin Manning, a climate change expert, recognised on global levels, showed us these recently at Takutai Kapiti, just showing how that sea level rise impacts. I thought it might be just useful. You can answer any questions around it later. But it just shows what's happening around the country. So here's some flooding. This is Nelson. And we know, and I didn't put too many of these because I just thought we've seen them on the news recently. The floodplains in Hiratonga on the East Valley, do one more, is similar to our floodplain. Okay. The historic floods that I mentioned earlier is likely to occur here potentially, and we need to be robust in our planning moving forward. That's all we ask, and we ask to be a part of that. We acknowledge the current measures that are there. We know the stop banks are there, but we've also known of Makatu and Nats and East Valley where the stop bank system is not foolproof and actually captures the water again afterwards and it slows it down from draining. And we noticed the, proposed development at Crystal's Bend, where it used to flood. And you can see it if you look at the Ōtaki River coming, the steep change and where it changes course. Well, that was its whole place of going over. So all we say is kia tūpato. And we're mindful of those that might actually be living there in the future. And again, just what are those sound planning decisions then for those areas, and not just that one, other areas that we also opposed in the change plan, the district plan change. Now, I haven't even talked about increased pollution, more rubbish getting littered on the streets going out to our moana, the strains on rubbish tips that will come with increasing population, pollutants running from our vehicles into drains, getting washed off cars, spraying of gardens, etc. All of those impacting on migrating birds, karerea, kahu, keriru, flightless birds, the Poole pukeko that you always see when you're driving about town being knocked over. Who cares for them? We ask that you do, all of you, and we look forward to working with KCDC on that. With increased people come things like cats, potentially rats. We even found a turtle the other day being aggressive towards our eels in a hinaki in one of our creeks recently. Unwanted pets. But where are our moko lizards, dare I ask, where the tuatara domains are? National policies may be okay for Aotearoa. I might argue that they aren't to increase populations. But here today, we're here to protect our district and our rohe. We strongly indicate to your panel to pause, take a precautionary approach. Our communities deserve well thought out future intensification designs that include input from mana whenua, the wider community as well. We acknowledge the expertise that exists alongside us. So in conjunction with professional designers and councils, we want to ensure green spaces, areas for that water to go, other species to run freely as well. Not just from the mountains to the sea, but longitudinal as well along our coastline. We also want to see the continuation of our proud Māori heritage in the cultural design moving forward. Ultimately, this process stems from the Resource Management Act, and we have a responsibility to protect our environment, and we'd love to see it flourish one day. We're not opposed to development. However, we wish to make sure it's planned. We know that the KCDC have a long-term plan review coming up. We've already submitted to the Greater Wellington Regional Council regional policy statement, which has 4 plans that come out later. There are further future opportunities to ensure that intensification occurs, but in a measured and a sustainable way. We request that you're not swayed by external opportunists and that you listen to our passion and listen to the committed and passionate communities. Lives could be at risk with the decision as well, not just people, but other species too. We looked at and saw the photos of kaimoana getting washed up. So we're mindful of all of that. We mentioned in our submission the lack of transparency and inadequate engagement, especially around the guidelines, and want to be included in that design moving forward. And we look forward to doing that with KCDC. We've had many of us work alongside landscape architects, restoration ecologists, hydrologists, geomorphologists, journey experts, botanists, biologists. So many collaborative projects. We've had LiDAR getting measured recently, drone experts, creative designers, film designers. We love getting engaged in those collaborative projects, and we look forward to doing that in the future. So help us today with our ability to be kaitiaki and ensure the well-being for future generations. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe Aroha. Used to holding this. Tēnā tātou katoa. Koutou kei te tēpū, tēnei e mihi ana. Koutou e noho nei, whakarongo ana mata ki o māta nei me ki hia māharahara. Hoi no ko te mana ko ia, i ka rangona koutou ki tō māta nei aroha mō ngā whenua Ōtaki. Tēnā koutou katoa. Okay, so my name's Denise Hapeta, born and bred in Ōtaki, fifth generation person living in Ōtaki. And recently, in the last few years, have had the opportunity to be working alongside Ngā Hapū Ōtaki, and more recently, our partners across the table here, physically across the table here, of KCDC. And I'm going to touch on a little bit more about what my two colleagues here have said, my whanaunga here have said, and just keep you on this journey that we want to take you on. And you may have already had an opportunity to walk around Ōtaki, and some of the things I might describe to you today, you may have already had the opportunity to visit. If not, then we'll be able to show you a map soon, and you'll get to see what I'm talking about. But since 2021, we've had the opportunity to be working a lot more closer with KCDC, specifically on the proposed medium density planning and the intensification plans for Ōtaki. Our prime focus given to us and instructions by our people were to stand up more housing for our people. That was clearly the instructions, and that's what they're expecting of us in the near future. So when the medium density plan came through, we looked at what that was going to offer for us. But our first grave concern was the impact it was going to have on our traditional papakainga here in Ōtaki. So we have what we call traditional papakainga. And in the streets immediately surrounding Raukawa Marae here are still fifth and sixth generation people living on the same lands that their tupuna lived on. Or within walking distance. We talk about walking distance of this marae, certainly within walking distance, because that's exactly why our people lived where they were, so that they could quickly service their marae when the time arose. And so for most of our houses just south of Mill Road here, including the one directly opposite, every fence had a gateway in it. And that gateway was for the rest of the whanaunga who lived behind in the street over or the third street over, so that when the core came to the marae, they would go through the houses, check on their whanaunga, see who was coming over, and then they would collectively come here as whānau and hapū to do what needed to be done here on this marae. Yeah, that continues. Some of the gates have gone, not all of them. Not all of them. But I want to talk about papakainga, because in early 22, we had the opportunity to engage with our with KCDC and their representatives in the planning and their planning team on the proposed district plan changes. And the potential those changes we're going to have on ourselves as mana whenua in Ōtaki. So we knew in order for us to be able to realise what our people had tasked us to do was to ensure that we were at the table and we were talking with our partners, and that they weren't just hearing us, but they were listening to us. So they were getting to feel what we felt for our whenua. So there were a range of meetings. One particular meeting, we said, next time you come, I think we should go on a hikoi, and let's go and show you our traditional papakainga and give you a first-hand picture of what it means to us and where those people live, and where my career lived. And now we're hopefully and where other family members still live, as far away as Iti Street, which is all but 2 streets away from here. So I'm going to talk about that soon. I'm going to show you a map. But then we also decided we needed to be working with art, because the 3 iwi sit here as mana whenua along te moana o Raukawa. So that's from my immediate te kākara ki Rangatira in the north, the Bulls, Himatangi, Tangi Moana area, all the way down Whakawhitia te moana o Raukawa ki wairau, ki whakatū. Koera te moana o Raukawa o te rā o te kotahitanga o ngā iwi e toru. So whatever we do on our lands around here, not only does it impact on our people here directly of ngā Hapū Ōtaki who are Ōtaki residents, but on our continued collective work together as three iwi who travel down to this area together, and maintaining that relationship, because was Ngāti toa are deemed to be in Porirua, actually they're right here. They're right here in this whare. Was Tiatiawa are deemed to be in Waikanai, actually they're right here in this whare, and that's what this whare represents. So whatever we do, we have to work with our partners, our iwi partners, as well as our Crown partners. That's indicative of everything that has been described to you earlier. Here in Ōtaki, our educational initiatives are not just Ngāti Raukawa, heck no, they're art. They are legal, they are the legal owners of Te Wānanga Raukawa. They are all in the Ōtaki Porirua Trust Board who owns all those farmlands on Tasman Road, and where all of our educational kura sit, including Te Wānanga. That land belongs to the Ōtaki Porirua Trust Board. So art are the landlords in Ōtaki too. Yeah, so it's a complicated, I mean, I can see Jason nodding his head, because when we went down and said that and described it to them, it was something they had never viewed Ōtaki and Waikanai in that light. But that is our history, and that has to be maintained for us going forward. So we've continued to work closely with our KCDC partners, and endorse what my whanaunga here have said, is that the initial experience was challenging. To date, we have thoroughly enjoyed, and we acknowledge the input and the time they've given to us over the last 2.5 years. We've expressed this publicly at council meetings. Yeah, we have nothing but admiration for the way we've learnt, and hopefully where they've learnt from us. And I guess one of the successful components of our discussions in terms of the proposed district plan changes is the design of the Kapiti Coast District Council papakainga, traditional papakainga. And so we had the three of us here, including Ngāti Toa, the planner, and another whanaunga of ours, Oriwia Rauriti, and we spent a long number, hours and hours sitting with our team from KCDC talking about traditional papakainga and why it needed to be treated with the mana and the understanding that it provided for our people. Yeah, and so traditional papakainga is something that's been handed down, or where the current generation of today, still live on land or own land that was once owned by their tupuna. On some blocks of those lands actually changed hands and went into European hands in between the last 180 years. But today, where those lands are back in the hands of those uri and those mokopuna of those tupuna, they are traditional papakainga lands, because they were, for other than an intervention for 5 or 10 years or 20 years or so, remained as papakainga land for our people. And there is ongoing efforts to continue to add to those blocks of land. So we took a little walk around town, and we showed them our traditional papakainga. And why did we show that? Because it was important them to understand that any medium density or intensification in this township was going to dismantle that traditional papakainga area that we had. So not to, we sought to not have any intensification any closer than Iti Street and Martini Street on the west. We asked that there be no intensification along Te Raupuraha Street, Tasman Road down to Te Wānanga Raukawa, because of our Māori education entities that are significant to our future and the future of our young people in Ōtaki. So Te Raupuraha Street has 3 kohanga reo, a kura kaupapa Māori, it has Rangatira Church, and it has Hatopeta Kāniera, which is a bilingual school. Yeah, but it has a Catholic mission there that is as strong in its reo Māori as Rangatira is. And it's John will nod because he knows Māori Mass is a regular event here in Ōtaki. Yes. Yeah. So the marae preaching, as I said, if I go to that map now and quickly go there and just show you. So we're sitting here on Mill Road. You can just see that little bit. So the edge of that purple bit there, just going to the east, is pretty much where we are in the marae. So that area sort of shaded in purple is pretty much what we call our traditional papakainga. Why? And we've gone just down there to the edge of Tasman Road, where Tasman Road commences, because that's where our educational entities are. Now, they are very much apart. So where our people can move from their homes into their community, into their learning environment, where it is te reo Māori, anake, that's important that that's not impeded, obstructed, or interfered with, or potentially have intensification of homes or other buildings around it that then start to break down what Kirsten described earlier, a 40 to 50-year effort by our people to work, diligently on the survival of te reo Māori in our takiwā, in our Hapū. That's important to us. I can say that those entities have made a substantial contribution to the economic development of Ōtaki over the years, and it's significant. It's significant. Okay, I'm just going to backtrack a little bit here. So what we talked about earlier was we sought with council a protection of our traditional papakainga and to remove those areas from planned intensification for the Ōtaki township area. So yesterday we heard some comments about bringing culture into our town. We have culture here. It's our culture. And it's embedded in us. It's embedded in this whare. If we were to be unsuccessful in our plea and our request to the local government, regional government and the Crown to avoid intensification around our traditional papakainga area, the noise you've heard for the last day while you've been sitting here, okay, would intensify 5 times. 5 times. The impact of that is that our traditional tikanga and activity on our marae is marginalised. Okay, people wouldn't be able to park out here. They would have to walk somewhere else. We couldn't hold a pōwhiri on our marae because of the noise. It's hard to do it now. It's challenging. We have to, if we have a tangihana here, we have to ask people not to park in front of the marae so that at least the hearse can come to the front gate. That's with the population we have now. You double that, you triple that, you quadruple that, you multiply that by 5 times, we'd become a pretty insignificant facility in this township resided by our people. That's one. So just want to move on now, and we've showed you the area of the traditional papakainga. But in our efforts to advance and have our concerns heard at a higher level, we have written letter to the Minister of Environment, conveying our concerns, very clearly detailed. The same concerns that we've conveyed to KCDC. And again, we heard yesterday that there's a rollout by the Crown to undertake intensification. KCDC are compelled to roll it out. We asked them to be brave on occasion, which would be a challenge for them. But we said when we first said, you could be brave and say to the Crown, actually, this isn't for Kapiti. It's not for Ōtaki. But that didn't get a lot of support. So we've written to the Ministry of Environment, conveying our concerns. I think you had the letters in your files. I don't think I need to read the letters or touch on them, but we very clearly described the impact it would have on us and our concerns. It came back to say that, well, there's been provision to acknowledge the marae precinct area. Okay, so not in his own words, but sort of said that actually I think we've done enough by acknowledging the marae precinct area, and I think that's as far as it's going to go. So that marae precinct area stopped out here on Mill Road. We asked that any intensification does not interfere with what we call our tirohanga pai along Mill Road. So for the well-being of our people, being able to see their pai maunga and tararua and know that there's a sea out there not far, and it's not going to be that horizon, or that pai as we call it, is not going to be restricted by 4, 5 or 6 level dwellings, then that would see our people essentially either reverting to the hills or reverting to the sea. Yeah, because their pie would be blocked. Their tirohanga, their horizon looks very different, and it would be very foreign to us to see that. So we talked about that, and when we received a letter back from the minister, we thought, well, let's should we take it further? Should we take it, and should we now look to get a fast track treaty claim lodged for breach of our rights as tangata whenua and mana whenua? And so we sought legal advice, and it was a very quick process. And the two advisors who we spoke with, who are currently engaged in substantial treaty settlement and claims for our people and others, said that they thought we had a very good case and we should pursue it, and that they're there to help should we feel the need to pursue that option. So that sits on the side, I guess, waiting, for us to push the green button on that. Another matter, and this isn't just, an observation yesterday as an example of, but what we've found to date is that, when you're trying to navigate the pathways and the structure of local government, regional government, crown, we inevitably have found that quite often they all work in silos. And so what we think is happening at local level will also happen at regional level. That's not the case. Where we work with consultants at KCDC who are listening to us, and then we move to a regional or have Crown representatives come out and who are hearing us but aren't listening to us. Yesterday was a good example. Okay, when we set a kaua and a tikanga to welcome our manuhiri into our house and onto our whenua, and they choose not to come through their process, that's a good example of not listening and choosing to pursue their own kaua. I'll leave that there. The discussions today have also reminded us of, what is provided for us in the treaty in terms of protecting our taonga. Aroha just described earlier about when Ngā Hapū was established, and it was established initially as a collective, because collectively we needed to challenge local government and regional government about their plans to take wai from our taonga, the Ōtaki River, to fill other people's tanks, other people's swimming pools, and potentially leave us high and dry. Not to mention what would happen. Aroha's given examples of what happens when water levels could drop, and the water life in the state of the wai that we treat so preciously is then compromised. And the next generations don't get to enjoy what we in previous generations have had the opportunity to enjoy. That's the threat to our taonga. And just lastly, just on slide here, just to say that, we are grateful for the meaningful engagement that we've had with KCDC. Despite what we're saying here, it has been a meaningful process. We have really appreciated the relationship to date, and it continues. Okay, so in the letter, I talked here about the letter to the ministers, and we talked about the legislation and the way it contravenes some of the policies and objectives described in the medium density development. And ours was really that we could see that the intention to allow for recognition of iwi aspirations, as mentioned earlier by my whanaunga here, and meaningful participation when you're trying to work through a kaupapa, an issue, which potentially, has one party, ultimately will have greater gain than the other. And so therein it diminishes or removes our rights as mana whenua, tangata whenua, and our ability to be kaitaki of our takiwā and our taonga. And therein we regarded that as a breach of the Treaty of Waitangi and our obligations. Hence the reason we sought legal counsel as an option. So the objective 1 and 5 of the MPS are important to us. Objective 1, New Zealand has well-functioning urban environments that enable all people and communities to provide for their social, economic, and cultural well-being, and for their health and safety now and into the future. Well, we've already described in numerous environments and here today where it doesn't. where it doesn't take into account our culture, our well-being, and what our well-being really is in the holistic worldview. Our physical environment is as important to us as our own physical health. To separate the two would mean that we're going to be unwell. Our people will be unwell. To be removed from our papakainga and from our, what we call our ukaipo, the place that nurtures us, which is what a ukaipo is. It's like a child who suckles on the breast of her mother will always see her mother as her ukaipo, the one that nurtures her or him. And will immediately, initially, always return to mama. It's the same for us in our whenua papatuanaku. We have to look after her, and we will always return to her to nurture. If other people choose to come in here and do other things to her that upset her way of life and her well-being, then ultimately we will be impacted on, and our well-being will be affected. Objective 5 talks about the planning decisions relating to urban environment. The FDSS taking into account the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi or Te Tiriti of Waitangi. And so where there's a perceived, where there's a perception by Crown agents, be it Crown, local or regional government, that they are addressing and they are meeting their obligations, okay, and ensuring their partner is also receiving consideration in their proposals, actually, is still a little bit lopsided. I'll be nice, it's lopsided, and not quite equal. But just wanted to raise those with you because they continue to impact on us and our kāinga here, our ukaipo here in Ōtaki. Policies 1 and 9 are also important. So policy number 1 talks about planning decisions contribute to well-functioning urban environments, which are urban environments that, as a minimum, have or enable a variety of homes that meet the needs in terms of type, price, and location of different households, and to enable Māori to express their cultural traditions and norms. I can't see that that's going to happen with some of the suggestions we had yesterday. We struggled to see that. Within reason, we can say we have premises in our main street in Ōtaki that are higher than 1 level. We do. We have had them for a number of years, 2 and 3 level. We've questioned those, and we've questioned the impact of those on our existing, even on our marae. We talked about the pai, and yesterday we heard about where you go up to 4, 5 or 6 levels and the impact that has on any neighbouring or immediately adjacent premises, grounds, etc. We raised that with KCDC about, an example would be, we're here in Mill Road, 20 metres that way outside our gate, 25 metres maybe is Ōtaki Street, which is sitting right in the line of medium density intensification, up to 5 or 6 levels. That immediately means if you go up to 3 or 4 levels, anything 4, 5 and 6 has a direct view over our marae ātia. Tangihana situations when people are coming on, probably inappropriate. So anything over 2 levels, which is already sitting there on Ōtaki Street, is impeachment or imposition on us, and the tikanga and kawa that prevails on this particular area here on Raukawa Marae. Policy 9 also talks about local authorities taking account of the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi in relation to urban environment must involve Hapū and iwi in the preparation of Resource Management Act planning documents, and any FDSS might, by undertaking effective consultation that is early, meaningful, and as far as practicable in accordance with tikanga Māori. And when preparing RMA planning documents and FDSs, take into account the values and aspirations of Hapū and iwi for urban development, and provide opportunities in appropriate circumstances for Māori involvement in decision making. On resource consents, designations of land, heritage orders, and water conservation orders including in relation to sites of significance to Māori and issues of cultural significance, and operate in a way that is consistent with iwi participation legislation. We are aware that these should be read with the other policies and with other policy statements, e.g. te mana o te wai. I talked earlier about the minister's response, and I think ours was about a 2.5 page letter. We got a half-page response, I think, and the closing statements referred to it that, well, that we see there's been consideration of your request to date in terms of the marae precinct. Actually, we sought recognition of our traditional papakainga area, and thought that and deemed that to be adequate and having met mana whenua's requirements. We haven't responded to that letter yet. But it advised that they thought our concerns had been addressed, and no, they have not. And we've held off responding. And in between, as we mentioned earlier, we have sought legal advice. Expressing our cultural norms. What does looking after our taonga and maintaining our relationship with our culture and taonga look like? What is cultural well-being? We have our whakamātauranga continue to grow and not to be impacted negatively. Kirsten's talked about that, what we have in Ōtaki and what we've worked so hard to achieve. And share with you today that Te Wānau Ōrākura is seeking to have a separate legislation in the way we operate. It's a long pathway, but like the treaty settlements and treaty claims. But again, it's because we feel passionate and that we deem ourselves to be the best caretaker of our taonga. Yeah. And to have intervention from others who don't understand that could potentially put it at risk for the future generations. We talk about our pakake, you know, our elders being able to view the weather and sky markers. I talked about earlier about our tirohanga, be able to see, you know, wake up in the morning and see the tararua and all their beauty, and know that, you know, on a quiet day when the wind might get up, you can hear the sea and the waves rolling at Ōtaki Beach all the way into the township here. Yeah, and that's a sign that all is well. All is well. As soon as that tirohanga, that view starts to change, it has an impact on our people. To ensure we have unhindered, you know, access to the whenua where our kai can grow abundantly, to have unrestricted access and zero interference with our wai, with our awa, so that our traditional kai can be maintained and continue to serve future generations. When you next go into the wharekai, I hope you get the chance, or if you step outside this door later, if you look at the 3 carved panels that extend out from our wharekai there, each panel has a carving on there of the traditional kai served in Te Kata o Raukawa, our wharekai. That's what we acknowledge ourselves for. That's what our people have always acknowledged ourselves for. To not be able to continue on with that, yeah, is a loss of mana for our people. Really important. It means managing light pollution so that we can show our mokopuna in the night skies and teach them about matariki. The importance of forecasting the week or the next day's weather just by knowing to look into their western skies and the beauty that holds here on a summer's night. Teach them the seasons as we understand them, you know, and the way that they can have abundance of kai. If those kai baskets were unimpeded, yeah, and left untouched and allowed to develop. Allowing our people to continue to live close to their marae matua for all the reasons and all the purposes that this was stood up for is important for our people. And there is much more. Briefly, we often said that, and we've said to KCDC, we've actually conveyed this on a number of times, so I know that Andrew and Jason have got to nod their heads when I say it. We said, well, if you don't agree to us, we'll just put the gates back on the river and you won't be able to come into Ōtaki. I'm sure a lot of people in Ōtaki sitting here would agree with me. Yeah, we'll just put the gates back on the bridge and that would be it. Like, I think I'm coming to the end of mine. I think pretty much, Kim, pretty much I must be. I am at the end of mine. And I just want to thank you for giving us the time today to sharing our whakaaro.
Kia ora anō. Just jumping back to talk about some of the details in the plan, some of our submission points that the council officer has responded to in the reports, but we'd still like to be given some attention or another look. So there's a number of things that have been responded to by the council officer, saying do not accept, but a clause that it does not preclude us working with the council in the future. And we note the goodwill and intent there. And we believe that's genuine. We are concerned though that we will both be a bit powerless to do some of the things that are in there because of the prescriptive nature of this plan change and the legislation behind it. We will keep those things on record and discuss them. But yeah, it doesn't inspire confidence for us, to be frank. I've listed there a number of the submission points that we do want to discuss further or have another look at, or for you to look into. 203.1 about meaningful engagement. 203.2 about obligations to mana whenua, working together to acknowledge mana whenua aspirations. 203.06 qualifying matter. 203.11 caring for our, can't read that, taonga, that are not yet on the SASM schedule. We have quite a lot that aren't listed already. So we're aware that should these plan changes go through as proposed, they're at risk because they're not yet on the schedule and protected. And that includes mahinga kai areas. There's a number of those that aren't on there. What happened here? 203.15, cultural values and tikanga. 203.18, changing, maintaining to acknowledging. Sorry, I'm sort of being quite brief here. Trying to get through some of the detail quite quickly because we've run over time. We want to, that one's quite concerning to us. It removes a lot of protection from some things. 203.31, surface water and flooding hazards, very concerning to us. We don't think the solution is sufficient. 203.34, building heights and notification in close proximity to educational facilities. That's all the educational facilities, not just the ones that we talked about earlier. Talking about 3-story buildings next to childcare, early child care facilities, primary schools, colleges. It's not a mechanism to limit that. 203.44, prioritising the care of taiao. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the population statistics. On the next slide. Actually, I'll just mention council, and we've touched on this, I think, but I just want to point it out again. Council have been, so we have the legislation and council have been prescribed a task, and they've got a lot of constraints and they've got a set role, and we have worked closely with the staff. So they're there doing their set task with really clear constraints, boundaries. And we're there with our set task with a holistic view holistic approach and taking into account all of the things that matter to us. And so we're in this sort of way of working, legal things behind us dilemma of trying to figure something out. We're kind of working at odds. None of us are intending to be. Everyone's trying to look for ways to create solutions that help everyone, but we're actually not able to do it. And the problem behind that is the legislation seeks to, in policy 1 and objective 1 of MPSUD, seeks to allow for expression of some of our tiriti rights. And it actually states some of the things, but then you get to objective 3 and some of the other objectives and policies, and it just cuts right over it. And Denise has talked about that, and you have that in our letter to the ministers. So we're all quite aware of that, and that's where we're stuck. So we get to now being a submitter, working through these things. We have asked the minister, and we do ask you to consider those things and acknowledge them and help us find a way through that. Now, the population stats. These have the figures from the appendices provided by the council officer just for 22, 2036 and 2051. And I've added these into here just for us to talk about what's actually projected to be needed here. So I've added into the 2036 roughly the dwellings, estimated new number of dwellings needed. So it talks about approximately 2,000 new dwellings. Andrew, please correct me if I haven't got that quite right. These proposed changes, would yield a whole lot more than that if everyone did all the sort of development that's enabled. If we're talking about 2,000 new dwellings by 2036, roughly, we're aware that there's currently planned developments happening or in consent or on paper that would get about 1,000 new dwellings within 5 years. Ōtaki has also been identified as a complex development opportunity, and we're part of a group that's looking at a number of things that could be done, and that could realistically see another 1,000 dwellings within 10 years. So I'm talking about in 10 years' time, we could see 2,000 new dwellings under the current plan, what the district plan currently allows. And then we could have a few hundred by landowners and papakainga developments. The point is that we're likely to achieve what's projected to be needed by 2036 without this plan change. It's not that we need it now or even to be active in 10 years. Next slide. We're also not sure that the statistics account for the changes that will happen to areas south of here once MPSUD and MDRS come in. Like, will people actually want to come here if they're able to live and work closer to Wellington or those other centres? Will the population growth that's been predicted for this area be as great as they're predicting? I don't think anyone really knows that. The point about that is the timing of these changes. So we would like to get those updated population projections done and do the work about how to have well-managed growth and what good growth looks like to all of us before this sort of plan change occurs. And as you know, yes, we've talked about Ōtaki being on the edge of the Kapiti district and the edge of the Tier 1 Wellington region, and question the need to have the level of intensification that's being prescribed happening here. So as you know from our documents, we're asking for a pause so that we can have the way things are being prescribed here reviewed and us to all work together. And we're not, as Aroha mentioned, we're not opposed to growth or to density. We want to make sure it's done well in accordance with our needs. We acknowledge that, yeah, some of our people are okay about living in denser developments. And some of our people currently live in those places. And that's fine. We want them to have that sort of choice. We need to do it in the right way. We all want safe, healthy, nurturing communities. It's the how that matters. And we want time to do that. Okay, sorry. So to sum up, art are the mana whenua in the area. We want to look after our waka mātauranga, our rangatiratanga. We want to be able to express our rangatiratanga and our kaitiaki rights. Survival and prosperity of Māori as a people is important, and we believe it has a national importance and significance. We are fully invested here. Our ability to practice cultural norms, tikanga and te reo needs to be in the ascendant. Our connection to our maunga and our other important places is critical for our well-being, our Māori worldview. We expect will be compromised if things go as planned. I don't know if we've made the point today, but to date, the developments that have occurred here have largely housed other people at a cost to some of our people. We've had a number of whānau displaced. And we're not sure that a lot of the development that's coming in the close future is going to be helping our people. That's something we have to focus on. And we're already marginalised. The potential of this district plan change could further marginalise us. Papakainga provisions will go some way to help. It's a great example of co-working. The Marae precinct shows goodwill, and our council seeking to help us and within the constraints of the change. We want to acknowledge that again. More work to do though. The promises of Te Tiriti, the Local Government Act, and meaningful participation are important in this work. We think that it's been conveniently skirted over by a number of organisations and people, and we're going to continue to point that out. We can provide this slideshow to you so you have all of these points, and apologies for taking way longer than we expected to. And if you have any questions for us, especially Aroha, ask that you ask those first, because she does have to leave soon. Tēnā tātou.
So I understood Aroha's points, and my questions were for Denise. So do you have any questions?
No, I don't. I don't have any questions. I need to say no.
No, thank you. Yeah, no. It's all good. So I wanted to improve my understanding of the papakainga idea that you're trying to convey, and I wanted to see if I got it right. So the area immediately around the marae, within walking distance, is very historical, ancestral land. And your people live around here and they walk to the marae. What's the spatial area that we're talking about?
Okay. Gosh, I haven't really thought about that. But the plans there might give them some indication. I'm not sure if you can get any scale off that and give it square area or square kilometers, so to speak. But whoops, I'll just show you. Oh, I don't think it'd be a kilometer all the way. Excuse my back, people. Yeah, hop over here if you'd like to have a look at it. But we're about here. Just about here. Yeah. So Raukawa Street, right here on this corner.
Yeah.
Is a papakainga of the people whose tupuna actually lived at the back of this marae originally. So the house was actually on the back.
Yeah.
So the original whare tupuna that stood here at the back here, the road wasn't there, of course, nothing was out there. And so there were kainga, actually kainga on the back here. My great-grandfather, my grandfather lived on here. My kuia was, they lived here until they built the new whare. This is the second one. And then they moved all to houses. They moved off it. The house over here on the other side here that you can see, that's a papakainga. Okay, there's third generation living in there now, and he's a karawa.
Yeah.
They're kaumatra. They have lived there. Their children stay here with them now because they need to, but they have lived there for all of my lifetime and longer. And so there's a house here, and that's they're members of our whānau here, just in the corner there. They're still there. They still live there. There were other blocks down here, further down here, but they have since sold and moved into European ownership. If we come, gosh, if I could take you up where I live right up here in Lupin Road. When we found out that my husband and I bought that block of land in 1979, 80, when we came, before we came home from Australia, and only to find that our tupuna Kingi Te Ahua, his name was on the title. And we found that, well, rightly so, we're back living on the whenua that he traversed years ago. And there's other pockets around there too. But it's the significant area that we want to talk about is this bit here. This is all built in, so not saying we can't do much about it. So this is Matini Place. So, these names have significance if you look at the names.
Absolutely.
If you just look at the names, the history tells you Hatfield, okay, close to Rangatira. Their house here, Osnalock House, is right there, okay. This block in here is tupuna land. It's called Mangapodi, okay, and the Mangapodi stream just runs to the north of it. That's designed for urban intensification. It's Māori-owned land. Actually, it could very well be our future urupa because we're running out of land at Rangatira. And then we have all this land in here, which is Rangatira. Again, tupuna land, gifted to the missionaries, moved into church hands, Anglican church ministry, etc. And then you've got where church, you've got Tūro Kohanga Reo here, and then you've got All Saints here, and then over here you've got, this is all Te Wānanga Design and Art, all our whakairo happens right there in that facility. And then you come up here into Te Wānanga and we've just now built out all of this. Again, that land is still owned by the people, and it was given to the missionaries for education. It continues to serve its purpose, educating our people. It does. All the farmlands behind here, they all owned by the Ōtaki and Pōrero Trust Board, another art entity whose function was to earn an income from farming and hand it out in the way of educational scholarships for our children.
Right.
That still happens. Yeah. But if you come into here, the area I was actually referring to when I talked about walking through the houses, these streets here, just here, whānau living in here, right next door to Helen, just over here on the road, have lived there for generations. Their family, all mokopuna of Te Raupuraha. At the back, you can go from their house and back over here, another whānau, still living in the south, fourth generation living here, still got gates between the fences that we can walk through. Not 3 more houses in here, all whānau of the Hapū of this people. Lived there for 3-4 generations now. Our family all have houses along the street. We all still live there. Generations are still living on those houses. Next street over, Initi Street. So there's no fences between these houses. You just move across the whenua. Gates into these houses on Initi Street. And again, I can go there into that house and houses in here. And all along here, again, ngā Hapū Ōtaki.
Yeah.
Still living there. On both sides of the street, not just one side. You come further down, our kuia, who's probably given her lifetime to this marae, lives right there. You come further down, another kuia's house who lived there all of her life. Significant contribution to this area. That's her home. Now her daughter lives there. Yeah. Right next door is Kirsten. Kirsten's there. On the other side, at the back of Kirsten, is her son. And their mokopuna.
Yeah.
Yeah, you come further down to Martini Street. Unfortunately, all of Martini Street down here went into Crown Land and the old state housing, now Kāinga Ora, predominantly Kāinga Ora homes, and went into the Crown because the police station and other Crown agencies here. But then if you come further up here and then you go down to Rauparaha Street and you get further down there, all of this area was targeted for intensification. These lands here are still, in these streets here, are significant to us. So we propose no intensification here, all by our educational institutions.
Right.
One, because that's Māori land. Still used for education. It has to stay that way or we lose our purpose. Yeah, if that becomes anything else. Further down the road is the Catholic school Hapū Kāniera, the Catholic Church, significant Māori Catholic Church, significant. Yeah. And then right next door is the Ngāti Kapumanua Whiti Marae and Tainui. But all of these lands on the eastern side of Te Raupura Street, designed for intensification. Just sitting in here, PCDC commands for flats, again, all designed for, targeted for intensification. We had asked initially when talking with council to avoid and remove these streets from the immediate medium density planning for the Ōtaki township so that those traditional papakainga could be preserved.
Yeah.
We have a house here, same family. We have further down Mill Road where it gets to past the main road up here. There's a whole block of land that's called Rickyville that belongs to one family here, and they are all still living there. Yeah. So there are other pockets further down, but they are the significant ones in terms of, and I'm not saying the people who lived there are the significant, but the fact that they were the traditional papakainga where our great-grandparents lived, and they lived there, that the sections were allocated to family members. That's why they're still there.
Yeah.
Well, all allocated to family members to stay close to the marae.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the reason for Minute 1, which talked about understanding the history, is because I knew from my reading that those were all native title areas that then were allocated to families. So does this area correspond then roughly to Precinct B? is that red line there? It's within it. So would precinct B define the area that you're describing as being excluded? Right. Yeah. What's the current
Thank you.
version of
So,
precinct?
the current version is actually, well, the recommendations version is slightly bigger to the southwest, around where all those orange lines are. But the area that's been described as kind of the core,
Yeah,
around the town centre.
so my question to Kirsten and Denise is, can you give us a map that shows or defines the spatial area that you think captures that core historical pattern of development? Because one of the things that we'll need to consider is recognizing that as a qualifying area for exclusion from the NDRS and so forth, while you work out what you want to achieve. Because without a spatial area, we can't, it's harder for us to say the whole of Ōtaki has to be excluded from NDRS. But what you've described resonates with my reading and memory about the actual historical pattern of development and the strong connection that's there. But I'm not familiar enough with Ōtaki to know how to spatially define that, and you are. And then my second question is, now that the town centre zone, it needs to function as a town centre. What's the sort of outcomes that you think are appropriate as a holding pattern, recognizing that it already has some degree of elevation? Is it sufficiently, is it a problem with the size of the Takiwa precinct, or is it a problem per se with what you described? And I can't remember the Māori word, but it's the sense of being connected to the sea and the mountains, that visual component. And has that been worked through, or do you think that more time is needed to conceptualize how you would do that, how you would set controls that would spatially define that sense?
I think we would be in talking with our people. So very quickly, when we first heard about this and we learned about the medium density, the proposal for the Ōtaki Township, we ran a number of open days here at the marae and had all the maps up on the walls for our people to come in, and the council staff came and shared at the time and looked at it with us, with our community, and it was open to the community, so it wasn't just open to our people. And we had some really good comments. So we took all the comments on post-it notes and we took them into account when we looked at what was the general and the most, the strongest factor coming through from our people. From our own people, it was traditional papakainga. But in terms of the township, it's inappropriate for us to say no intensification at all between Ōtaki Street and the roundabout on Tasman Road. I say the roundabout because that's right outside the Kura, Ngāti, which is a very high traffic zone now, right now. Any further intensification immediately around that will exacerbate that, and the road won't cope, and it will become a very dangerous area because it has high pedestrian people crossing the road with children and our university, our whare wānanga there. So, and we have two two-story buildings in the main street between Martini Street and Ōtaki Street now. We actually have three if we include the accountants just over here on the corner. So we have them on the corner. We have the museum. The Ōtaki Museum is a two-story building. And then we have the picture theatre down the other end, and then we have Māori Lands right in the middle. So we do have existing two-story. I don't want to take up too much time because it's getting late. You people have had a long day too. But if I just think back to when we I think you know we're happy if there's a button you can press that says pause on the processes now to allow us to go back and do. We should consult with our people so that it's not just our opinion, that everyone have an understanding. I can see more people in here today that probably haven't had a chance to come and sit and have conversations with us. But if I just think about our elderly population, and you heard some of them yesterday talking about their own specific residential areas. But if we just thought about, you know, every one of them in here would know what it feels like to walk down the main street in Ōtaki, where a double trailer truck laden with landfill is driving through the town, and how the road shakes. Yeah, how the road. If you're sitting in here and a double trailer came past, it would shake. It would shake quite loudly. That's with existing population numbers. If you elevate to 5 or 4 levels in town, and the top and the first one, the bottom level is commercial, which is what it's prescribed to be, and the other 3 or 4 are residential, and the 3-bedroom. You know, the foot traffic in here, we you know, I just don't know how they'd get out of town. I don't know how they'd get out of town, or how the people in town could come into the township. And I say that because it's you take your life into your own hands sometimes when you're trying to alight from your car and open your door when there's 2 trucks going down the main street in Ōtaki and you're on the side of the road. Yeah, that issue was actually put on the council table last week about transport. So I think if there's an opportunity to pause and give us a couple of weeks perhaps, or perhaps, yeah, I'd say a couple of weeks at the very latest, years. Yeah, but just we need to do due diligence and make sure that we've covered off everybody's perspective. But yeah, it already has. We already have issues in our main street with traffic numbers and the volume. You add to that volume or you double it, and without making other substantial changes to the layout of the land and the roads, it just can't happen. Of course, roading and everything has to come in with it, which means that either we go on the north side of Mill Road. Who moves? Does Countdown move, or do we move? It should be those on the other side. The later arrivals, of course, should move first. But that's in my simple head of planning and common sense. That's what we're looking.
I wouldn't describe my practice as being heavily embedded with treaty issues or Māori land law, but there is a history of legal constructs or processes activating disassociation or loss. And was I correct in partly understanding that part of your concern is if you allow the MDRS now, there's a way in which it actually potentially incentivizes further alienation. In other words, people trying to take advantage of short-term economic activity or gain to undermine the long-term association. Is that the concern?
Sorry, yes, that's one of the concerns. And I think pretty sure we've talked about, we're in the hearings process. Denise talked about that. We're in the hearings process at the moment. We're nowhere near the settlements process. There's potential that we will receive some lands back in this area. But in the meantime, with these provisions, things could happen on the land right next to those parcels, or even not likely to be on them, but maybe, that could render it difficult for us to do the things that we would want to do on those land parcels. So for us, it's a very real risk that's running, and that's another issue about timing. It's just not a good time. If we could push this back a bit, especially given questioning the actual need for it to be happening so soon with the streamlined process, that would be helpful.
So you do not support the extensions of the zones that Kāinga Ora are promoting.
Oh, sorry, I meant to acknowledge the council officer. So there were a number of requests for other areas to be zoned residential to enable intensification and submissions, and meant to support the findings of the recommendations of the council officer to not support those. We thought that was in line or it helped. It didn't put at risk those places that we had concerns about. Yeah, does that answer that?
Ngātira kia ora kōrua, koutou katoa. Kara nohi wā koe nei pāta engari me ki pēnei ahau. Ko tahi tonu te kōrero, ko Ōtaki. Koina te kōrero, ko Ōtaki. Me ona whakapapa, ona piringa, ona moe moe a, ona iwi katoa e kōrero tēnei kōrua. Koina te kaupapa, kia pai tonu te noho o tēnei o ngā taonga o Ōtaki. Kia kore e whakararu haere e tau iwi e ngā pōrere a tanga o te Pākehā. Reira, me ki pērā hau, nara ke te rongo ake ki ngā naue, ki ngā mamai, a koa ki te pai te haere o ngā kōrero mai koutou me rātau, me te kaunihira. Engari ko taku whakaaro, kei te karanoa kia tau katoa wera tuahuatanga. I nā nuatu te rahi o te huarahi hei takahi tanga o tātou. Nā reira kia kaha tonu koutou. I'll make a brief attempt at translating what I just said, which was, I mean, I don't have any, I have got far too many questions. So right, it's probably better that I didn't answer any of them, or even a number of observations I'd quite like to make, but probably too late in the day for that. But I think what's at the heart of this particular part of the hearing is this place, Ōtaki. It's not the houses, it's not the streets, it's the place. It's what Ōtaki stands for, its history, how it came to be, its whakapapa, the dreams that the people of Ōtaki have to make Ōtaki an even better place than it is already. I think that's the crux of the broader range of issues that we're dealing with here. And we can always delve into the details and twist yourselves into knots over it. But really, when it comes down to it, it's not too unlike any other community, where community pride, community history, what's brought it to where it is now, is what's at the heart of any discussion anybody dares or wishes to have about it. And this is no exception. I finished by saying that it's nice also to hear that there's a good relationship between Ngā Hapū or Ōtaki and the council. I'd probably go a bit further and maybe suggest that whilst the model may look good, feel good, seems to be working well, but it may still not be the right model. And I think we need to be thinking beyond just what we're doing at the moment, that there might be an opportunity or chance, or which might require a bit of boldness, to look at a different model, a model that really does reflect a lot of things we've been talking about here. And I'll use the word loosely, partnership. What does a partnership model really look like? Because what I see is still a set of rules and guidelines that's been defined by one sector of the community. It's been put in front of the other sector to respond. And that model operates everywhere. It's not just here, but it's a model I think that a lot of people recognize that there are shortcomings in the model, but I don't think anyone's ever been bold enough to really stand up and say, yeah, let's change the model. Because whilst the model remains what it is today, even I would say we're going to miss the boat. We will. We will tinker with it. We'll fix up little bits at a time, but we won't really fix the bigger picture. It just stands to reason because the model's wrong. It really is. I mean, the partnership should be one, as some people have already said here, that you actually sit down and work it out together before you start going talking to anybody else, before you start disseminating it to the rest of the world. That you need to be sitting down and I'm no doubt you've been doing that, but I don't think it goes far enough at this stage. And I see this so often in other parts of the country where I work. It's the same thing over and over and over again. I did say earlier on that I think we've come some way towards creating a better model. And you said it yourselves. You said it, Denise. You know, we've come so far, but we've still got a long way to go. So I commend the council. I commend Hapū Ōtaki. I commend Te Atiawa. I commend Ngāti for the efforts they're putting into trying to or attempting to do something about it here on the Kapiti coast. And maybe this is the opportunity for the wider Whanganui Ātara Rohe to come on board with the kind of support or even the energy, because this takes a lot of energy to be a bit more realistic about the model that we're dealing with, and maybe the need for something that is a bit more refined and a bit more inclusive, that it does, you don't just sit there on different sides of the table talking, you actually sit on the same side of the table. Now that's a challenge. It's a huge challenge, but I think it's one that's worth having a go at, because I got to be honest, I keep hearing the same thing here that we're talking about. I've heard it 100 times before. I'm doing some work down in the South Island. They're saying the same things. I'm thinking to myself, have we ever heard this before? Why hasn't it changed? Why hasn't there been any progress? And I think we do need to take a step back and reflect a bit more openly and honestly about the models that we have to work with, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges. I think people are hearing each other much better now than they used to 20 years ago when I first started doing this sort of stuff. I mean, you could put a lot of people on one side of the room and the other people on the other side of the room, and they wouldn't talk to each other. Or if they said anything, none of them would, one side would never understand what the other side said. Now, I think we've come more towards the middle of the room. Not close enough yet. We might be about where I am here, about where that table is there in this particular building. Getting closer, but I think the real challenge is bringing even that closer to the middle, so that you do have a kind of fairer reflection, I think, of the broader community aspirations that we all want to achieve. But we're kind of trying to achieve them from different viewpoints, and we aren't yet brave enough, don't have the guts, I suppose, to say, well, let's put some of this other baggage to one side and let's get to the middle and let's really bang heads. Because banging heads often can do it. I'm not saying literally banging heads, but because that's what I'm hearing. I mean, the three of you, I mean, those presentations were top rate. Absolutely, because they make the point. The problem is they often stop in the middle of the room. They don't get too much further past the middle of the room. You can sit on one side of the room, give the message, it stops here, and then the other side of the room really doesn't, they might hear it, but they don't take it up. So I think that's our big challenge. Because I think there's from what I here at the moment, there's actually quite a clear understanding from both sides of the fence that there's such a thing. If we're talking about both sides, I think there is a clear understanding on both sides. It's just managing to actually get that nutted into a cohesive picture or one sort of book or whatever it is in the middle that isn't frayed on the edges, you know, and it is reflective of the sorts of things we've all been talking about here today and for the last week. I mean, I've kind of sat back here and listened for just to see what is it that's driving or not driving this part of the country in this wider context. And I think there are a whole lot of things that could be learned from the exercise that we're going through here and similar exercises all through the country. One of them is just being bold, not being afraid to be honest about what your concerns are or what you think ought to be done. And it's that openness and boldness that I think is required to then bring you, especially in this rohe on this coast, more to a point where there is a better understanding, a better appreciation of maybe different viewpoints that needn't divide the community. I think they could be rallying points. It could be. It could be made to be rallying points. But that's the challenge, I think. That's what I see. So I don't have any questions. I hear what you're saying loud and clear. I hear what everybody's saying loud and clear. I think the question now is, how do you respond to those perhaps even pleas or nowhere, those sort of things, and make some sense out of it so that you are enabled to do the things that are right for this rohe, you know, which is right for Paraparaumu, which is right for Paikakariki, which is right for this whole rohe. I think that's really what I know I'm raving on a bit here, Mr. Chairman, but I just felt it after listening to what they were saying today that, you know, that's the kind of openness and honesty that these sort of exercises call for and require. And you have people here who, I think they all want the same thing. We just don't know how to put it all together. So that's my 5 cents worth. But thank you very much. Thank you very much for your feedback.
Thank you very much for your submission. But we do have some homework for you, just to work with the council. Ultimately, Mr. Banks has to form his own professional opinion about the idea, but we want to make sure that the counter proposition is put clearly, and we know there's a holding position on the coastal qualifying precinct. It's a holding precinct. I don't think you've told us a destination, you've just told us to hold. So it's another holding precinct called perhaps the Hapū Ōtaki precinct. And it's really to get a policy in consultation with the council, describing it as a place of exploration for recognition of the ancestral connection of Hapū, and then the spatial extent of this precinct, so that the plan signals that this is a journey and it's a holding position, because there are Pākehā European who live in this area, and you have described how you want to work in partnership with them. So there has to be a point where there is a destination, but you want to have that time for a journey. And if we have that structure there, we can then say in our report to the council, we agree with whatever Mr. Banks' position, or if it's common to yours, or yours, which is that position, which is a holding precinct with a defined spatial area. And it can't be obviously the whole of can't be Ōtaki Beach, and it can't be Ōtaki Township, but it's something that I think you're describing as a spatial area that makes historical sense in terms of the patterns of habitation that you want to sustain and you don't want compromised, and I hear that. In terms of the wider management of te ao Māori, that's a bigger conversation than what we're dealing with here. But we can encourage the council to start thinking about how to treat Ōtaki as distinctive, and a place where, with the challenges going forward, there's opportunities to underscore te ao Māori. Like, as I explained about that piece of land that Ms. Huang and Mr. Richards wanted, if you were to develop that, it seems to me that it would cry out for how it restores the mana and the te ao Māori and the connections. So that would be a long conversation with Ngā Hapū and Ngāti Raukawa. Because, you know, even as I read the Atkins map, and he's reputed to be very accurate about his drawings, when I asked about the dune, it wasn't because I knew it was significant, but I suspected it was, and here it is. So, yeah, I'm fortunate, having lived here for 20 years, that I have seen the ups and downs of Ōtaki, and I know how hard won Wakamātauranga is. I still remember the old Tegel factory going and the economic impact of that and all these things. And it is at a space of fragility, but great promise. And I think it's important that these systems are in place to protect that. So I wish you well on that journey of getting to that, but that's what we need. And Claire's got some planning expertise around what I'm talking about too. So you produce that for us. Thank you. So is that the end of today? No. Ngāti toa. Okay, I'm sorry. We're sorry that we've gone on so long, but we'll accommodate despite the hour. Just keep going. Thank you. Yeah. So do we have 10 minutes for a break? Some of us are older, we need a toilet break. And then we'll, yeah, and then we'll have Ngāti toa and Ms. Oktem-Lewis. Thank you. Right, it's resumed. All right, so we'll resume the hearing, and we have submitter 161 to Rūnanga o Toa Rangatira on behalf of Ngāti Toa Rangatira, and that's Onur who's present. So welcome, Tēnā koe, and you know who the panel is?
Yes.
You know our panel? Okay, cool. I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa, nā mihi o i kia koutou katoa. Ko wai aho, ko Karadens te moana, ko Kashkar te maunga, ko Laz me Adigia te Turkish iwi, ko Onur Oktem-Lewis tō ingoa. No poriru aho, ko kai whakamāhere o te Rūnanga o tō rangatira. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Onur Oktem-Lewis, and I'm the Principal Planner for the Rūnanga o tō rangatira. And I got Jaida Howard with me today. Jaida is Rūnanga's Junior Planner, and she'll present our view with me and answer any questions that you might have. Also, Jaida has done a lot of foundational work for the Papakainga chapter that is in front of you today as well. So just to note that. But first of all, I would like to acknowledge the incredible wahine that just stood before you, Ngā Hapū Ōtaki, and all of our tangata whenua partners, te atiawa ki whakarongotai, and all of the hard work that has been done today. So kei te mihi nui. Thank you for being able to speak to our submission today, which is numbered 161, and thank you for listening to our whakaaro, kei te mihi nui. All points will be made as they relate to our submission, dated 19 September 2022, and please note that our speaking points today cover all of our submission points, despite they may or may not specify the exact corresponding submission number. I'll make 12 points today. Of these, particularly 2, which I'll get to in a second, points will be about the overall process and somewhat deceitful nature of implementing the Section 80E of the Resource Management Act, which is the intensification planning instrument process under the required NPS, urban development. I will then proceed to my first and second point. So fundamentally proposed IPI plan changes across the country and across Ngāti towards Rohe, and if I may go a bit stronger in my language, have been done in a way that had to somewhat breach the iwi engagement requirements. This is first with the timeframes offered, and the second with the amount and type of evidence provided for iwi to evaluate and understand these large-scale proposals. Both were unreasonable and quite inappropriate, and we think this is unacceptable. We advise many council staff that this is a matter of ultimate seriousness because the proposal impact on the values that are ultimately protected or supposed to be protected by the Section 6 of the RMA. The second part of this problematic picture is about the level and amount of information tangata whenua received in such constrained timeframes. And these timeframes were also unreasonable and completely disproportionate to the scale of the changes proposed. So the councils, as you know, are required under the RMA 32.1c, 32.2c, 32.4a, A and B to prepare reports that contain a level of detail that corresponds to the scale and significance of the environmental, economic, social and cultural effects that are anticipated from the implementation of the proposal, and assess the risk of acting or not acting if there's uncertain or insufficient information about the subject matter of the provisions. And if the proposal is a proposed policy statement, plan or change prepared in accordance with any of the processes provided for in Schedule 1, which is not in this case, the evaluation report also must summarize all advice concerning the proposal received from iwi authorities under the relevant provisions, and also summarize the response to the advice, including any provisions of the proposal that are intended to give effect to the advice. So this hasn't been quite delivered for iwi. Now, this has been somewhat discussed in detail in the office's report. Pages 34 and 36 in particular discuss the office's opinions of the matters related to tangata whenua. And I quote, I observe that a consequence of the obligations and constraints imposed on the council by the legislation has been to create a situation where iwi considered they have been unable to meaningfully participate in several aspects of the plan change. This is regrettable and not a situation that the council sought to be in. Also, officers' reports say on page 35, and I quote, I acknowledge that there are several submission points that request in general terms that tangata whenua and the council take the time to review various matters within the district plan. And these are recognition of tangata whenua cultural values, tikanga, and connections to land and water throughout the district. Further development of provisions related to sites and areas of significance to Māori. Further development of provisions related to matters that PC2 identifies as qualifying matters. Development of design guidance specific to tangata whenua. Assessments as part of consent processes. Review of explanatory text to district objectives. Planning for the development of infrastructure. Look, some of these items I have mentioned are Section 6 matters. The way they are treated has the legislative ability to change a process and even pause. They're related to our rangatiratanga, manakitanga, and kaitiakitanga roles under the Section 7 and Section 8 of the Act. Proposed changes are at odds with these powers, and we do object the way some of these topics have been dealt with. And our submission points make these very, very clear. We haven't been provided robust, evidence-based and good information about the full impacts of these changes to our whenua and to our taonga and to our people. The assessments are quite shallow and lacks robust evidence behind the decisions made in places quite narrow-minded, sort of emanating from Western academic constructs of planning practice and usually applying policies literally, although it may not deliver the results for communities. But the most ironic part is of it that it may not deliver for the MPSUD itself either. Even if tangata whenua did have the information we were looking for, we also would have very little to no time to evaluate it for ourselves. And what these mean for our people, our whenua and our taiao. All topics mentioned above, they're not optional or some pathetic detail we picked it up. They're about our sites of significance, our taiao and our whenua. Commissioners, I also would like to note that we have provided this advice to all council officers across our rohe that they should craft a letter to ministers to ask whether a pause can be provided because there are fundamental process and implementation issues. I'll now move on to the technical details. Before I get to our third point, just would like to say we're less than impressed reading the officers' responses to some of our submission points. We are also rejecting these points and do not accept the arguments being made against them about their validity or whether they address what we asked. With that, our third point is about infrastructure. So planning decisions should absolutely be confined by the available infrastructure, as this defines the housing capacity being achieved realistically or not, but most importantly shows the respect we're showing for the taiao. Our kaitiakitanga role in the Act is outlined very, very clearly. If our role is damaged because there was a lack of infrastructure, then this damages our responsibility to our people that will look after the taiao, whenua, and ultimately our people. So whilst the district plan may not perform that role, we absolutely will. A district plan that doesn't achieve our kaitiaki goals may comply with the Section 80 of the Act, but fails to deliver on the Section 7. We do not accept the argument that is provided in the officer report that infrastructure is something that we should be waiting for long-term plans to address. This is somewhat ironic given the speed that this legislation is given effect to, which is now. I would like to refute the argument that MPSUD infrastructure is covered by the housing and business assessment models and the development capacity is determined to be infrastructure ready. This is quite a naive view of the landscape we're living in at the moment because it means we'll have to just wait decades to see plan changes unfold to adjust to local government funding processes. Also, a separate very relevant point is that nobody asked iwi what they think about the housing and business assessment models because we think it is also naive to trust in clause 3.7 under the MPS, the local authority must update any relevant plan or strategy to address this. These plans take years to update and change if it were to be determined there is insufficient infrastructure to support the development capacity. Our team also investigated the Kapiti housing and business assessment and looked at some of the key findings of the assessment. It is a big deal what it says in page 270, and I quote, planning for growth is an ongoing challenge for Kapiti, requiring significant ongoing investment. Ōtaki has a number of potential constraints to its water and wastewater networks due to higher levels of anticipated growth occurring. The availability and cost of infrastructure to service new development is a significant factor affecting how and where growth and development could take place. It'll be increasingly important to monitor and manage infrastructure capacity, costs, and the efficiency and effectiveness of networks and services. Ōtaki currently has existing deficiencies in its water storage that are proposed to be addressed around 2024 and 25 as part of longer-term plans to service growth in the area. The assessment also identified potential constraints in Ōtaki's wastewater and drinking water networks over the medium to long term. And stormwater capacity is also a significant challenge in the district, as a larger number of existing urban areas are impacted by flooding. This is largely a result of early pipe networks being put in place in accordance with what was required at the time, without foreseeing long-term changes to the district's growth and climate. Okay, so the same report also presents various points regarding caveats to local road network, public transport, and state highway network, and the related constraints in the context of growth and the increasing demand and travel. We're not delusional that these will be done just because the district plan said so. District plan only governs the land use. It doesn't govern how big infrastructure projects should be or will be synchronized. I'll now move on to our 4th point, which is the amenity values in the IPI proposals. We're deeply concerned that the way amenity was treated, since our values are embedded in it, despite how subjective this topic is, and we do not accept a position where a district plan can dilute a value that is also trying to maintain. If the policy intention was to be diluted due to NPSUD implementation, then district plans will fail to deliver these goals with the land developers and land users as they're downgraded. In an ideal planning system, and I'm quoting a Productivity Commissioner report on better urban planning, councils should make use of infrastructure investments to help offset any amenity loss in areas facing significant change from development. There is no remedy or acknowledgement of this kind of statement in the proposed changes. Instead, we have the totally unsubstantiated argument of amenity values are enabled to change as opposed to being maintained. And we do not accept changing amenities as a function of the urban environment, as it includes cultural and Indigenous components. It shouldn't be up to housing intensification or densification rules to fundamentally change what the amenity means for cultural and Indigenous contexts. Also note that amenity that is supposed to be provided as per intensification and densification proposals will have their own limitations and definition. This is almost like comparing the amenity values of a site of significance to a backyard park and bench and green space provided to serve a 6-story development. We're not fooled. The implementation of NPSUD in the district plan somewhat muddies the definition of amenity from a cultural perspective. And we also do not accept what has been provided in the officer's report as an argument explaining that cultural values are already recognized in the relevant plan schedule. This won't be simply adequate for the areas and spaces where EB finds it important, but hasn't been identified in the relevant plan schedule. And Auntie Denise also mentioned on that in her evidence that most of the sites aren't in that schedule because they're going through a settlement process. Our 5th point is climate change. This point applies to all the changes that are sought on the operative district plan as part of the IPI, but in particular development objective 03, the wording of clause 10 about climate change. Of course, district plans have a role in reducing emissions. District plans are the only rule books in town and the only way that a land use can be managed. We were particularly entertained by the report that says this will be governed by the regional council, throwing the responsibility to another institution and avoids courageous action for land use. This will be a reality anyway in years to come. District plans to give effect to higher order documents and climate change legislation. It is astonishing that the district plan increases housing, but avoids its carbon footprint on the basis that it's not their mandate. Our submission on the coastal qualifying matter is related to this point, as we need to make sure we have tight requirements for development in the zone. Drafting intention currently doesn't reflect that and may even be read as the future review could open these places up for development. Our 6th point is about the phrase of well-functioning urban environment in the proposed changes. Officer's assessment on page 74, we're unhappy for this to be blindly implemented. All well-beings are connected to TIAR. It doesn't matter whether it's built, an urban environment or rural. All well-being definitions need to include environmental well-being. We're seeking relief for this to be fixed. In fact, we're more than happy for council seeking permission to add this definition if need be. If the legislation is inadequate for reflecting the aspirations of iwi and Māori, we should be able to address this together. We understand the mandatory literal nature of the NBS guidance provided, but still find it quite inappropriate for iwi and Māori. It means that no one has to cater for the environmental well-being, which is fundamental to all well-beings. Our point 7 is about housing variety and choices. Our submission regarding this point was responded to in the same way above, arguing the crafting of the section of the proposed plan was part of the mandatory part of NPSUD. But DO02 has the potential of disadvantaging tangata whenua and limiting their aspirations. There are specific directions within the content of the objective about the neighbourhood's planned urban built character, which won't necessarily align how tangata whenua wants to realise their aspirations in these spaces. We believe this clause can be interpreted to say if a tangata whenua development proposal didn't fit in the neighbourhood planned urban built environment, then it could be rejected. So in that case, who decides what comes first and how? Are consent planners the right people to decide the outcome, or the way this clause is crafted should vest consent planners to judge on this matter? We don't think so. Tangata whenua do not wish to see compulsory but potentially very arbitrary statements from NPSUD overtaking or overruling our rights to development or the development the way that tangata whenua interprets it. This may not always fit with what consent planners understand from neighbourhood urban built character either. With that point, I will move to our point 8, and that is about our sites and areas of significance to tangata whenua point. So I would like to acknowledge the engagement effort by the council officers on the IPI and sites and areas of significance, and the incredibly limited time they had to provide essential information and evidence for us. Tangata whenua simply didn't have adequate time to assess the scale of impacts, and neither they had the right information. This means that inadequate evidence will have incredible bearing on the implementation of the proposed changes, mostly negatively at this point in time, and we would like this to be remedied as soon as practicable. We also would like to reiterate disallowing all of the submissions about the Kāre Wharewa Urupa as the site is a Schedule 9 site and should be protected also. Our point 9 is we appreciate the mahi that we were able to achieve to enable Papakainga chapter. We would like Papakainga provisions to be enabled in zones that are not currently enabled, and also we strictly are against all the submissions that were made to include Papakainga for everyone. Iwi and Māori has deep mamai connecting to their ancestral land and having their land back. The Papakainga isn't for cultural appropriation, so I will leave it at that. Point 10, we do not want centres hierarchy theory to identify what tangata whenua can and cannot do on their whenua. So central place theory is a spatial model of market interactions. It assumes a hierarchical relationship between towns based on what services and goods are available. And this is a highly academic Western construct and is built upon the argument that settlements simply function as central places, providing economic services to surrounding areas. It has all sorts of assumptions like topography, it needs to be flat, evenly distributed population, resources, equal purchasing power of people, perfect competition, uniform transport network, transport costs that are proportional. These are obviously not true. And this is such an inflexible way of viewing Kiwi concepts, especially when our tire is also further degrading and that we want to decrease the negative impact of capitalism on our Māori. The assumptions of this theory have no bearings on the issues tangata whenua face in an urban environment, and this theory has no te ao Māori in it either, so we disagree that it's used to refute Papakainga in other zones. Point 11 is about urban form and development. We opposed prescription in a new policy that is currently elaborated in 6 clauses. These clauses go by enabling greatest building heights and densities in various specified centre zones. And it is a cut and paste definition from NPSUD again, and doesn't acknowledge the larger definition of what an urban built form is and tangata whenua's role in it. This is confusing because urban built environment isn't actually defined in the operative district plan 2021. This would have been an area council should have also partnered with tangata whenua to define the urban built form and its cultural components. Also, we do not need to be an affected party to be able to comment on anything that has been built in the centres. In the case of Ōtaki, for instance, the whole place is a significant place to tangata whenua. As my last point is about the financial contributions and offsetting section of the proposed changes, tangata whenua isn't happy with the word offsetting. If there was to offset an environmental impact, we'd rather see that negative impacts to tire wasn't allowed in the first place. We would like the intention of the wording changed. With that, I would like to conclude, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Onur. No, I don't have any questions, but there was a lot of material, and I'd really like to have a copy of what you've written.
Sure.
Because it's got a lot of content, And I think you've constructed those thoughts very well. But partly because of the hour, I was just struggling to absorb some of it. So if you'd provide that, that'd be really useful.
Yeah, ka pai.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Now, did your colleague want to say anything?
Did you have any questions?
Any issues?
No.
Debbie, did you work with the council in terms of the development of the papakainga provisions?
Yeah, yeah. You did.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Jaida was involved in the main
Literature.
research and literature. Yeah,
Yeah. Sorry, is it Jade, is it?
Jaida.
Jaida. Okay. Well, those look like they've been quite successful, don't they?
Yeah. We've had them and a few other plans as well. So that's
That's
good
right.
to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. All right. Well, thank you for your contribution. And if you send that through to Hannah McCashin, who is the administrator, if we have any questions that arise, we'll come back to you.
Yes, please. Yeah, sure
Cool.
thing.
Thank you, Onur.
Thank you.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
All right. So I think that's the end of the day. It's the end. So thank you very much. This is our last hearing component in this whare. So we thank very much Ngāti Raukawa for hosting us. Some of us have never been inside, and it's just got an incredibly lovely feel to it. So it's been very enjoyable, and we feel greatly blessed to have heard it in the marae. So thank you.
Ngāti rā i mūtu tāke o tō tātou mutu.